Hi everyone, welcome to In Deep Geek Live. Today we are looking at Robert's Rebellion, the culmination, the end of the Targaryen rule in Westeros. As always, what I'm going to be doing today is I will start by setting out what happened at quite a high level. I'll just sort of explain in my own words the build up to it and what happened during the rebellion itself. Then I will take questions. I've got my questions framed around what my patrons say, but I'll be picking up as many questions as I possibly can from the chat as we go through. As always, what I'm going to try to do also to start with is just give you a flavor of a couple of things going on out in the wider geeky world. Two things to pick up on over the last week. Firstly, if you missed it, The Witcher Season 2 official trailer is with us. It looks amazing. I think we seem to have entered an age where there are many, many trailers for each new TV series as it comes up. This is, by my count, at least the sixth trailer that The Witcher Season 2 has released, but this is the official trailer. So this is the main one that they're going to be going with from now on. If you want to see that, if you didn't see that first time around, to go and check out, it is linked on my Twitter. Another thing linked on my Twitter, literally just in the last few minutes, is the Wheel of Time. If you're a Wheel of Time fan, I enjoy the Wheel of Time, and I know many other people do as well. It's going to happen in 2 weeks' time, just over 2 weeks' time. But if you want exclusive first view of the first two episodes of The Wheel of Time, there are going to be showings across America in movie theaters. Do go and check out on my Twitter. There's a link there if you want to book tickets. I think it's first come, first serve. So do go and check that out. And I have been assured, I did ask them, I've been assured there will be screenings out in the rest of the world as well. As soon as I have details, I will share them over on my Twitter. But let's get into what we're talking about today, which is Robert's Rebellion. And I'll just kick off a couple of questions from my patrons just to sort of set us going. Catherine Furseth saying, could you say a bit more about the political realities, allegiances, and power struggles in Westeros that caused the war? And Marley saying, what really triggered Robert's Rebellion, and was it truly built on a lie? Well, I'll use those two as a starting point, really, for where we're at, what the situation was. We were last looking at the Blackfire rebellions, they extended over many, many years, but they were quite some time before where we're at now. House Targaryen now is just a shadow of what it used to be. There's clearly no more dragons. There have been no dragons for 150 years. The Targaryen family tree, which once was very large, which once was linked politically to lots of different families, is actually now quite withered. It's quite small. It actually doesn't have many political alliances outside of a very small bubble. It is linked by marriage to the Martells, and that's roughly it. A couple of generations back, it had been linked to the Baratheons, but since then, no, the Targaryens have not. There's just not been enough of them to marry anyone else, and those who have wanted to marry have been marrying each other, so there's no political ties. The Targaryens are weak. Added to which, they made themselves even weaker. The king, the Mad King, Aerys II, had been alienating a lot of people. The most important person he alienated was Tywin Lannister, the richest, strongest house in the Seven Kingdoms. He was the hand of the king. He was a strong ally. Now he's gone all the way back to Casterly Rock. Nobody really knows where his allegiances lie, but he is no longer a clear ally for the Targaryens. While this is going on, and it's probably worth saying, there was a long winter at this point, 3 years of winter building up to Robert's Rebellion. So everyone's been back at home. They've not been out mixing huge amounts. But while this has been going on, there's been this slow building of an alliance between the strongest houses towards the north of Westeros. House Starks, Southron ambitions, is what we're told. But he has arranged for his eldest son to marry a Tully, Catelyn Tully, linking them in with the Riverlands. He sent his second oldest son to the Vale of Arryn to be fostered there by John Arryn. Also there, of course, is Robert Baratheon. So they become friends. The Arryns, the Baratheons, the Starks become friends. Linking that in with the Tullys, we suddenly get 4 of the 7 kingdoms allied. There was a plan as well at some point to get the Lannisters brought into this big political bloc. Jaime was going to be marrying Lysa Tully. That would have been quite some marriage if it had happened, but that was a plan. The houses that were outside of the Targaryen loyalist houses were starting to unite. So that's the situation we have. And the tinderbox for all of this, we will get into it, I'm sure, a bit later, is the tourney at Harrenhal. That's the point where everybody has been, during this long winter, everybody has been back at home, and then everybody comes back together and sees what Rhaegar's like. They see what King Aerys has become. Alliances are formed, people talk, people plot. And off the back of this, we have the catalyst moment, which is when, allegedly, Rhaegar runs off, kidnaps Lyanna Stark. Now, that has 2 crucial people believing that that was a kidnapping. The first is Brandon Stark. Brandon, the elder brother of Lyanna, he charges down to King's Landing, confronts the Mad King, gets captured. It's worth noting he's not alone. He had a small group of retainers with him. Aerys summons the fathers of all of these retainers and the father of Brandon Stark, Rickard, down to King's Landing, and then he kills father and son. At which point we go to the other person who's convinced that Rhaegar and Lyanna was a kidnapping, and that's Robert Baratheon, because Robert Baratheon is in the Eyrie with Ned Stark and Jon Arryn. Now, Robert Baratheon has a grievance because he thinks Rhaegar has run off with his fiancée. Ned has a grievance because Aerys has just killed his brother and his father. Jon Arryn has a grievance because one of the other people who died and was killed by Aerys was his heir. So they all have a grievance, and then Aerys demands that Ned and Robert come to King's Landing. They both know what will happen if they go there. They both know that it's just summoned to be killed. So what do? Their only real choice is to declare war. That is the start of the war. But they're in a bad position. The 3 leaders, Jon Arryn, Ned Stark, Robert Baratheon, the 3 leaders are in the Eyrie. They're personally safe where they are, but the Vale is cut off. It's been winter, so the Mountains of the Moon are impassable. The only major port in the Vale is Gulltown. Gulltown is held by the loyalists for the crown. So how are they going to get out? They come up with a plan. Jon Arryn is going to secure the Vale. He will gather together his forces. Ned Stark is going to go north. He's going to escape through the Mountains of the Moon, solo mission, head back up north, rally the troops, come back down south. That will take some time. It's a long way to the north. It's a long time to gather the banners in the north, and it's a long time to bring them back down south. Robert Baratheon is going to retake Gulltown for the rebels, cross over to the Stormlands, his homelands, get his army, and then bring his army up into the Riverlands, and the 3 armies are going to meet in the Riverlands and then march on King's Landing. That's the plan. Ned Stark does his bit. It's a long and arduous journey. We don't know much about the details of it, but this was a hard journey. He headed north through the Mountains of the Moon, which is a hard journey. He headed off. Sea journey, he got shipwrecked. He arrives across, finally he does get to White Harbor, makes his way up to Winterfell, gathers the forces. We know that the Northern Lords are never the easiest people to get on your side. He was not raised to be the Lord of Winterfell. He's making this up on the spot, but he does. He gathers them together and gets them down south. He does his job, but that takes some time. Jon Arryn does his job. Again, it takes some time. He's got a lot of recalcitrant lords. All the lords of the land, it's worth pointing out, we've got a question about this later, but they had basically, if their lords, their Lord Paramount, were a part of the rebellion, then a local lord had a choice between the oath that they swear to the king and the oath that they swear to their Lord Paramount. Some places, most people went with their local lord. Some places, most people went with the king, the Targaryens. The Vale was a lot more mixed. Robert Baratheon's story is the longer and more complex one. He does make it. He takes Gulltown. He makes it across to the Stormlands. He gathers his forces. He hears a report that there are some Targaryen loyalists, 3 Targaryen loyalist families in the Stormlands who are going to gather at Summerhall, the ruins of Summerhall, of all places. So he brings his forces there, and then he takes them on one at a time as they arrive. 3 battles in one day. And through this, he gets his modus operandi for the battles. Robert Baratheon charges into the thick of the battle, seeks out the opposition commander, and takes them on 1-to-1. That's what he does in almost every battle, and he wins. He wins. He is an absolute force of nature. 6.5 feet tall, we're told, 2 meters high, absolutely muscle-bound, strong, wielding this huge hammer, unstoppable force in his prime. He takes on 3 battles in a day. He wins all 3 battles. He then heads across. He wants to skirt around the outside of King's Landing. He doesn't want to get to King's Landing, in the way of King's Landing, where they're gathering their army. So he heads sort of across the south of the Riverlands before heading up north. Then he re-engages with the Reach army. The Reach army are being loyalist to the Targaryens. They are also the largest army in all of Westeros. The Reach is overall the richest area, and the army there is the biggest army. And they have probably the finest general in Randyll Tarly. Randyll Tarly was leading the advance force. The advance force of the Reach army have a battle with Robert Baratheon's whole force, and Robert Baratheon loses. The only battle he loses in the entire war. Randyll Tarly is on the verge of following up, because Robert Baratheon's had to retreat. He's on the verge of following up when Mace Tyrell arrives and goes, "No, don't worry, just leave them be. Let them go on their way, and we will go off and besiege Storm's End." This is quite a crucial moment in the war, because they probably could have taken out Robert Baratheon at that point. He was at his weakest. The army he was facing was stronger than him, and the general was frankly better. But Mace Tyrell decides not to do that. He decides instead to take his forces down to Storm's End, which is a very well known as being a very hard castle to take, and he basically besieges it. He camps outside it, and just waits for a year or so. Now, this bears all we're never told this, but it bears all the hallmarks of Olenna Tyrell just being clever. She, or House Tyrell, know that this war could go either way. They have declared for the Targaryens. They have to declare for the Targaryens. They're not aligned with the rebels at this point. They have to go that way, but the rebels could win. If the Tyrells go down and besiege Storm's Landing, no one can claim that that's not a good thing to do, to win the home castle of Robert Baratheon. Of course, it's a sensible thing to do, but probably not the most sensible thing to do. And it takes their army completely out of the war. They're there completely out of the entire rest of the war. If they had been involved, it may have been very different. But they basically vacated their role and went and sat in a field outside Storm's End. So Robert Baratheon regathers his forces, heads north. By this time, the Targaryen army, the crown army, has been gathered together, and they are harrying Robert Baratheon's forces as he heads north, trying to meet up with his two other friendly forces, the Starks from the north and the Arryns from the Vale. There's no big battles up this way, but bit by bit, he gets harried, he loses troops, bits of his army get separated, he gets separated, he ends up in this place called Stony Sept. He ends up in hiding, and then John Connington, who is the Lord, who is at the time the hand of the king, he's in charge of the army, he then hunts for Robert Baratheon in Stony Sept, and he cannot find him. He searches there for a very long time and does not find him, and eventually the bells ring, and what do you know? Ned Stark, the Knights of the Vale, are there. Robert Baratheon is rescued. John Connington fails in his mission, eventually ends up being stripped of his post and exiled. Robert Baratheon joins up with the rest of his forces, and the initial part of their plan is success. They finally all come together, and at this point, they arrange to formally bind together these four great houses in marriage. Ned Stark marries Catelyn Tully. That bond is forged. Then Jon Arryn marries Lysa Tully. That bond is formed. Robert Baratheon was due to marry Lyanna Stark at the end of the war, so that bond would be forged. This is now 4 houses joined together, and they head south. They head south to face the final big battle, the decisive battle of the war, which is the Battle of the Trident, the Ruby Ford. Rhaegar, by this time, has been recalled. He heads up the forces of the Targaryens. Huge battle. Robert Baratheon does the thing that he always does, charges into the center of the battle, finds the opposition commander, takes him on one-on-one, and he kills Rhaegar. Rhaegar is dead. The Targaryen forces are defeated. Now there's nothing between the rebel army and King's Landing. Robert Baratheon, however, has been injured. He has to rest up for a little bit, so he sends Ned Stark to go down with the army to King's Landing, because they have learned that finally, after all this time, Tywin Lannister, who has sat out the entire war with his army, is now marching towards King's Landing. Which side is he on? No one knows. He's not declared. He's not answered anybody's messages. He's just heading to King's Landing. Tywin does get there first. He arrives, says to the Targaryens, "I'm here. I'm on your side. Let me in." They let him in. It's a trick. He sacks the city. He kills all the Targaryens he can find. Jaime Lannister, the last remaining member of the Kingsguard in King's Landing, kills Aerys II, at which point Ned arrives with his army, is appalled at what happened with the Lannisters. But at the same time, the war effectively is at an end. The Targaryens have been overthrown. By now, Robert Baratheon has declared that he wishes to be king. It took a whole year or more even for him to get to that point. They didn't start out with him saying, "I want to be king," instead of them. It was just a war of revenge, a war of getting at the people who caused them ill. Finally, he's declared he wants to be king. Ned and Robert have an argument, a huge argument about the murdering of the Targaryen children. Ned storms out because there is one more potential battle outside Storm's End, because the Arryns had left their massive force outside Storm's End. They'd not done anything, but they had to be dealt with. Ned marches down there. The moment they get there, Mace Tyrell says, "We surrender," and he just heads straight back home to the Reach. So they weren't really playing much of a role in the war. While this is happening, Robert Baratheon is being crowned king in King's Landing. Ned picks 6 loyal people, heads off to find Lyanna, and the rest we know. So that is Robert's rebellion. Ned comes back via King's Landing, makes friends once more with Robert Baratheon, and the world as we know it is set in place. Robert Baratheon keeps a lot of the people who were in power before Varys. He keeps in place. He keeps a couple of members of the Kingsguard who survived also are there in place. A lot of the establishment figures are kept in place. He just comes in. Lyanna is dead, so he has to marry for political reasons rather than for love, and he marries Cersei Lannister, and the world as we know it is set. Okay, so that is the overall setup for Robert's Rebellion. While I was going through that, I did have a few super chats, so thank you very much. Ariel Winchester, just the super sticker, thank you so much. Andre Rodriguez saying, love your content, thank you, I hugely appreciate that. Candide saying, how would you weigh the chances of the three culprits, Jon Sr., Ned, and Robert, being fostered at the Eyrie versus Bloodraven's influence towards the rebellion, the Tourney of Harrenhal? Oh, this is an interesting one. So I think to wind back to the Tourney at Harrenhal, that's the tinderbox for this. It's where Rhaegar and Lyanna met. So from that, you can trace a direct line to Rhaegar and Lyanna running off together. That's very clear. It's also where lots of people met together. Alliances which were being formed were formed in more in stronger bonds. It's also a moment when people could see what Eris was like. 3 years of winter meant that only the court knew quite how bad he had got. Now everybody could see exactly what he was like. So the dissension was fermenting there. This was the tinderbox for what happened. In terms of the idea being that the three, Jon, Ned, and Robert being at the Eyrie, being, if this is what the question is, being part of Bloodraven's influence, we can't know that. I mean, I always love to think that Bloodraven's influencing everything, but I think his influence was through Howland Reed at the Tourney at Harrenhal, rather than through the establishment of those links at the Eyrie. Those were political things. Those didn't need any outside influence. This was a perfectly logical and rational response to what was happening geopolitically in Westeros. So that nothing needed to happen there at all. It was it was a fire waiting to happen. Nenyon saying, just to thank you for all your work. I haven't been able to follow your streams for some time now. Just happy that I can do it today. Well, fantastic to have you. That's hugely appreciated. Let's go over to, and incidentally, while I think about it, I know last week we had a couple of sound issues. I've recently got a new setup here, as I'm sure many of you know, trialing out new places for where the microphone is and things. I think last week, occasionally it cut out. I think it's when I was moving my head. So I'm trying my to point over there. So if that happens again this time, please do tell me. And if somebody could put a timestamp down in the comments, I would hugely appreciate it, so I can go in and have a look and try and afterwards and try and figure out what was going on so that I can improve it for next time. I think I've got it sorted, but if not, please do let me know. Okay, let's get into some questions from my patrons. Seltz says, hello, Robert. Love this topic. Same here, by the way. I've been looking forward to this one for quite a while. For those who do not know or haven't watched them, I did a very long series of videos. I don't know, maybe a couple of years or more ago now, on Robert's Rebellion, just going through from the very start all the way through to the Tower of Joy, just explaining in detail what happened at each stage. It was one of my favorite video series that I've ever done, to be honest. So if you're interested in this subject in more detail, please do go. I think the playlist is linked over there on my main YouTube page, so do go and check that out if you're interested. And thanks for picking it up, and to your moderators as well. Moderators, thank you. Say it every week, mean it every week. You're the best bunch of moderators a YouTuber could possibly wish for. Thank you so much. If you are watching live, if you are in the chat live, please do show the moderators a little bit of love there. They deserve it. If I am not mistaken, says Seltz, I believe that at first Aerys was not going to attend the tourney at Harrenhal until Varys convinced him otherwise. My question is, if Aerys was such a bad ruler at that particular time, with his mental health in rapid decline, why did Varys champion for Aerys rather than Rhaegar, if Varys truly serves the realm? Rhaegar was smart, brave, and compassionate, as well as being a great warrior. Shouldn't Varys have been all for him rather than Aerys? This, just to pick up, Alejandro Martinez also said, I have two Varys adjacent questions. I heard or read someplace that Varys' intention on bringing Aerys to the tourney was to show the realm the sharp contrast between the Mad King and Rhaegar. Does that suggest Varys caught wind of what Rhaegar was planning? Okay, so in terms of, was Varys aware, first of all, of what Rhaegar was planning? Taking a step back, what was Rhaegar planning? Rhaegar had been ostracized within court. Aerys had been paranoid, increasingly paranoid, that Rhaegar was plotting to take the throne from him. He didn't like the marriage, even though this came from him originally as an idea. He didn't like the marriage to Elia Martell. He didn't like the fact when firstborn child was presented to him, he said, smells Dornish. He was not good. And eventually the court broke down into two factions, those who were supportive of Rhaegar, those who were supportive of Aerys. Eventually, Rhaegar moved himself to Dragonstone to create some distance between the two of them. So the fact that there was a difference between the two of them was known to everyone. The tourney at Harrenhal was almost certainly, just reading between the lines, it was almost certainly, yes, it was a tourney, but it was almost certainly an opportunity for Rhaegar to get the lords of the land together and to show off who he was and his prowess. Don't forget, he was there and he won the tourney. Was that entirely deserved by him? Well, he was a very good jouster, but there are a few hints that maybe he had a little bit of help along the way as well. To look great, he sang beautifully in the feast. He was there in all his finery, looking magnificent. This is compared to Aerys, who was paranoid, who was angry, who was impetuous, who was divisive. Yes, this was the time Rhaegar was thinking about testing out support for him pushing his father aside and becoming king. That's what the clear hint here is, that this was what was going on. Varys sends Aerys there, basically saying, Rhaegar's plotting something. You really shouldn't just be staying at home. You should be there as well. Don't let him just have this as his effective great council. The echoes are there. The first great council held by Jaehaerys was at Harrenhal, so the echoes were there in people's minds of that's what Harrenhal's about. So Aerys goes there. Was this deliberate on Varys's part? It's possible. Who can tell the mind of Varys in this? It's possible. He certainly will have known what the lords will have thought of. He perhaps will have thought, maybe I can aid a peaceful transfer of power from Aerys to Rhaegar. That certainly seems to be in line with his thinking. But it's also worth noting that the Varys we know in A Song of Ice and Fire, this is Varys 15 years later. He has grown up before the tourney at Harrenhal. He grew up on the streets in Pentos and around the Free Cities. This job he had in Westeros was his big break. Aerys was the person who gave him his first big job. And probably it was this experience, and also a bit later the experience of Robert Baratheon, that helped forge his idea that while the lords play all their games, that's when the small folk suffer. This is where his understanding of the world came from, because as he grew up as a child over in the Free Cities, he didn't know what the lords were like. So that bit certainly came from his personal experience from Robert's Rebellion and onwards. So it's possible that he was playing some deep game, but we'd never get any actual evidence that's what he's about. Why did he support Aerys all the way through this? Well, Rhaegar wasn't actually providing active opposition to Aerys. Once the war had started, Rhaegar went into hiding. Effectively, he disappeared for 12, 18 months. He wasn't there. He wasn't the opposition. So if Varys had wanted Rhaegar to take over, actually Rhaegar wasn't playing ball. He wasn't opposing. If he wanted Rhaegar to take over, the best way to do that was to keep Aerys in power. And then, as per what seems to be Rhaegar's plan, after the war, Rhaegar to take over from Aerys. That seems to be the most logical way. If you were being charitable to Varys and say that his idea was to get a good king on the throne, and he thought that Rhaegar was going to be a good king, that would probably be the best way to do that. Second question from Alejandro Martinez, saying Varys doesn't seem to have any clue of what really went down. How is it exactly that the lie that started Robert's Rebellion has been kept so secret all these years? Someone always talks, says Ariel Hota. Well, yes, someone does always talk. I think in terms of Varys not knowing what's going on, there's also a hint that he may have been playing both sides in this, which I mean, I don't want to put too much on this, but it's noticeable that he kept his position after the war. And it's one thing to keep members of the King's Guard who are known for their nobility and loyalty and things like that. It's completely another to have the Master of Whisperers from the previous regime and keep them there, the person who knew all the secrets of the old regime being your spy master. That's quite some leap, which seems to suggest that maybe he might have put an olive branch out to Robert Baratheon somehow. The one hint we get is that, if you remember when I was describing the war, Robert Baratheon discovered that 3 houses of his own bannermen were plotting against him and were going to meet up at Harrenhal. So he rushed to meet them and to take them on. All we know is that those 3 houses were betrayed by someone. We don't know who, but maybe this was Varys. Maybe this was Varys hedging his bets. It's possible. In terms of who the lie that started the rebellion, that has been kept secret all these years. The lie, I mean, this is a line that we use a lot. Robert's Rebellion was built on a lie. The lie effectively is that Rhaegar kidnapped Lyanna against her wishes. That is what they say is the lie that the rebellion was built on. In reality, the rebellion would have happened anyway. In reality, the moment that Jon Arryn's heir, Ned Stark's brother and father, had been killed, that war was going to happen. That was always going to happen. This was just the thing that made it personal for Robert Baratheon. So, yes, I think there was a lie. I did a video on this, and perhaps we can get onto that later. But I do not think that that fact or lie was what actually caused the rebellion. As I said, the battle lines were drawn already. We had an alliance there and ready, and then Aerys did bad things. Diego Godoy saying, "Hola, Robert. Hola. What are you looking forward to the most from the upcoming Broadway play about the tourney at Harrenhal? Anything in particular you'd like to learn more about? Well, yes, for those who don't know, um, the we get every now and then updates about HBO shows, what they might be producing in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, and we obviously know we've got House of the Dragon. At the moment, there could be, I mean, George R. R. Martin has hinted as many as 8 different things being worked on. One thing outside of HBO that is being worked on is a stage play of the tourney at Harrenhal. Now, I have to admit, this, out of all the different things that are being developed, this is the one I'm most personally excited about, because George R. R. Martin, it's a mysterious thing. We know lots happened there. George R. R. Martin has said that so much happened at the tourney at Harrenhal, you could write an entire book about it, and a George R. R. Martin book at that. Hundreds and hundreds of pages could be written about what happened in those few days at Harrenhal. So I'm really excited for this whenever it happens. As for what exactly, I think the meeting of Rhaegar and Lyanna is this as we thought, the Night of the Laughing Tree, and Rhaegar tracking down the Night of the Laughing Tree, finding it's Lyanna. Is that what was really going on? I'm pretty sure, but I need to hear it from George R. R. Martin. Secondly, Howland Reed. It's and they may write the play. George R. R. Martin is definitely involved in the writing of the play. They may write the play in a way that leaves it still a little bit open, but surely Howland Reed was behind so much of what was going on. The timing of his arrival is just too suspicious. The fact that he happened to be sharing a tent with Ned, too suspicious. The fact that he is the person who instigated this whole Night of the Laughing Tree thing, too suspicious. There's so much going on. He has to have been involved. So, I if I had to pick anything, it would be Howland Reed and it would be Rhaegar and Lyanna. But there are so many other subplots happening all over the place that it's too much, and I cannot wait. Austin Flowers asking, will it be a musical? We have not had confirmation, but I personally hope not. Except for possibly 1 or 2 songs when Rhaegar sings the song that made Lyanna cry, then I want to hear that. I want to hear the song. That is almost certainly the song of Ice and Fire. But yeah, I don't think that George R. R. Martin is going to allow this to happen until The Winds of Winter is released, because there's just too much. It's just too much that will be revealed. Reflective Rambling saying, I fully expect you to make my jealousy level skyrocket and to make into previews, workshops, and tease us with indirect comments on it. That would make me very happy. As I say, this is you get so few little benefits from being sort of a YouTuber doing this thing, but occasionally you do. Fingers crossed that maybe I might be able to get to see it somehow. That would be amazing. I don't know. Anyway, I would love to see it. In any event, I will pay whatever it takes to get to see it as soon as I possibly can. Although I suspect that they will probably do the same thing that they did with Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, which is to make everybody in the audience swear not to reveal the secrets. So yeah, maybe I won't be able to tell you afterwards. Cloaked One for picking up for Weston Dowie. This is you do this all the time, Cloaked One. I hugely appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed. Picking up a question for Weston Dowie, saying, first off, love your videos. Thank you. You have some great insights. What do you think is the greatest tragedy of the rebellion is? I think as much as the small scale human tragedies are there, and the tragedies of the Starks are huge in this. I think I'm with Varys. Whether the extent to which he means it, you can come to your own conclusions. But I think I'm with Varys that it's the small folk who always suffer the most. That is the greatest tragedy of this and every war. And we see 95% of this story that we read is from the perspective of the nobility. It's the 1%. And every now and then, George R. R. Martin just kind of drops the camera a bit, lets us just see down to what's happening in real people's lives. And war is devastating. Just to pick one random example, when Tywin Lannister and the Lannister army got into King's Landing, did they just make straight for the Red Keep? Did they just target Targaryens and Targaryen loyalists? No. The army just let rip through the city. There was every kind of horrific, just like when the Dothraki attack villages over in the Dothraki Sea, there's every kind of horrific action happening. And that was what Ned, as well as the Targaryen children, that was what Ned was horrified by. The people who suffered, they were completely innocent, the people in King's Landing. And we're just for a moment, George R. R. Martin just sort of like, it's almost like he's sort of panning away from the geopolitical stuff that we talk about all the time, and just says, but don't forget all of these poor women here who got raped, all of those people over there who got killed for absolutely no reason, just because the rulers, they wanted a change of ruler. That's the real tragedy in my mind. And Andrew Kay saying, agreed, the War of the Ninepenny Kings is put across as a routine, somewhat easy victory, but apparently damaged a generation of small folk soldiers. Yes, indeed. And Cloaked One just saying, always thinking of the little guys, can we vote you for PM? And I say that as someone who isn't even a UK citizen. Well, thank you very much. I think George R. R. Martin cares about the small folk. I think that's one of the things which comes across in this. One of the reasons I like it is that people who haven't really engaged with the books often just think this is about glamorizing violence, lots of it. But George R. R. Martin, he's a pacifist, and he wants us to see the damage that is being done to real people's lives. Anyway, moving on. Good question. Thank you very much. Shasha saying, hi Robert, I hope you are well. I am, thank you. I'd like to get more of a general overview about allegiances. We know that Robert's faction was supported by the North, the Vale, the Riverlands, the Stormlands, the Targaryens by the Crownlands, Reach, Dawn, the Westlands switched from Targaryens to the Baratheons at the end. But how much do we know about lesser lords who chose a different allegiance than their liege? The Freys were biding their time. Seem to remember that Darry went against the Tullys. What about others? What about the Boltons? Saying, since I'm homesick, I might be able to watch live. I hope the better soon. If you're not well today, yeah, do get better soon. This is a really interesting question because everyone, as I said a little bit earlier in the live stream, every noble house was presented, and this is similar to the other civil wars, the Blackfire Rebellion, the Dance of the Dragons. Everyone's faced with this decision, the noble houses, whose side do they go on? And do they, on a point of principle, follow their liege lord? On a point of principle, do they follow the king that they've also had to swear fealty to? Do they go with who they think is in the right? Do they go with who they think is most likely to win? They have to balance up all of these things. Now, what happened was that in the main, the North, they followed Ned Stark. This is, I mean, we don't get any details about this at all, but this is a huge diplomatic victory for Ned Stark, and shows he was relatively young at the time, but it shows his strength of character. We've seen how unruly the Northern Lords are when Robb Stark calls them together. there's every reason to believe it would have been the same when Ned Stark called them together, and yet he did get everybody behind him. So they all were in line. The Boltons also got in line. Roose Bolton, I think I remember that he called for Sir Barristan Selmy to be killed after the Battle of the Trident. So the Boltons, he was definitely there at the Battle of the Trident. So yes, that's what happened in the north. Dorne as a whole all stayed behind House Martell, although they stayed out until the very end of the war. The Reach broadly stayed in under the Tyrell's leadership. We've already talked about the Crownlands. There were 3 recalcitrant houses there. The Vale we've already talked about a bit. It was House Grafton, or Mark Grafton, I think, perhaps, who was at Gulltown, and he decided to support the Targaryens rather than the Arryns. That didn't go well for him. You talked about House Darry. Darry, you'll probably remember the name Willem Darry, who was the person who managed to smuggle out the Targaryen, the last 2 living Targaryens at the end of all of this, taking them off to the Braavosi coast, we're told, and that's where Viserys and Daenerys ended up with Willem Darry. He was the Master at Arms in King's Landing, so he was a part of the court there for the Targaryens. So House Darry stayed loyal to them, despite their liege lord being part of the rebellion. The Freys, they were just late. The late Lord Frey, this is where it comes from. Kat remembers it. It's actually during my reread of Game of Thrones. If you want to go through it with me, I'm sort of tweeting through it about 1 or 2 chapters a week over on Twitter. Do go and check that out. Just tweeting my thoughts chapter by chapter. Kat thinks almost every chapter for a cat once she's left Winterfell in book 1 is her thinking about how unreliable the Freys are, how during Robert's Rebellion they should have responded, but they just took too long and then arrived too late and didn't actually play a role in the war. So that was what they were like, and this was heavy foreshadowing by George R. R. Martin. It's, if you read the chapter when she goes in and negotiates with Walder Frey, and they come up with the agreement that Rob's going to marry Walder's daughter. The amount of alarm bells that go off one after the other about this not being a trustworthy family is astonishing. George R. R. Martin, the Red Wedding was a shock, and it was meant to be a shock, but George R. R. Martin did not. No, he gave us a lot of warning signs about it. Let's put it that way. Reflective rambling. Thank you. You all, again, picking up a question from someone else. You do this as well a lot. Thank you so much. This is for Totrigo. Could you talk about the Greyjoys and their battle in the Shield Islands? Name of the rebels and Vance. The Greyjoys were uncharacteristically quiet. What led to Lord Quellen's hesitancy? So they were very quiet. And this isn't actually a surprise. The Iron Islands, like the North and Dorne, have a very strong sense of self-identity. The other parts of the Seven Kingdoms, the exact borders over time, over millennia, kind of shifted and moved around. But Dorne had a very clear self-identity of who it was and where its borders were. The North did. It knew its border was there at the neck. The Iron Islands similarly. So those three areas always have much stronger self-identity as regions than the others. And the Greyjoys were never very tied in to the rest of the Seven Kingdoms. So when there was a civil war, and this happened all the way through the civil wars that we have, you can see it time and time again, is that they didn't really get in on one side or the other. That's not really their style. During the Dance of the Dragons, for example, then they just raided up and down the west coast. They were asked to, but that's all they did. They rejected the chance of being on the small council, gaining lands and power. They just wanted to do their thing. So that was what was happening here. They battled away. They did a little bit of fighting, but it was for themselves rather than anywhere else. So you're asking about the hesitancy. It's more that they didn't care. They cared more about what happened afterwards, and it was just a few years after this, and this was obviously Balon, but the Iron Islands then made a bid for independence once the Targaryens were gone. That's the long game for the Greyjoys, for the Iron Islanders. They don't care too much about what battles go on the mainland. Mark Adams just saying much love to the best moderators on YouTube. I heartily agree with that one. Thank you very much for that. Jay Chef saying, what was the most heroic act of the war and the most heroic captor in this chapter of Westeros history? Interesting question. In terms of, I suppose it all depends on how you interpret heroism. In terms of who was the MVP of it, who was the person who did the bravest, astonishing, you could say heroic acts in battle, then hands down this is Robert Baratheon in every single battle, leading the fight against Gulltown, 3 battles in one day, taking on the commanders of each of them himself. This is taking down Rhaegar himself. This was single-handed heroism. In terms of personal heroism, we read so little about it, but when you read the accounts of Tyrion crossing the Mountains of the Moon, anyone crossing the Mountains of the Moon without a huge guard, and then you think Ned did that, it would appear on his own. Then he got into a boat across very choppy waters, across a sea that led to a shipwreck. That we see that he then self-sacrificedly married someone that he'd never met before. He led a battle. Ned was astonishing during that war. I think his personal heroism for me is, I don't think that the history books wouldn't record it as such, but his personal heroism was pretty astonishing. As for the rest, I don't know. There is a strange heroism, and again, it depends on your interpretation of the word heroism. There's a strange heroism to what Jaime Lannister did as well. He saved the lives of hundreds of thousands of people by killing Aerys II, and then following up by killing the Rossart and the pyromancers who were going to set off the wildfire across the city. His one act there saved more lives than any other single act in the entire war, and he would have known that left him open to charges of being a kingslayer. He would have known that there's a chance that if the wrong people arrived first, that he would personally be killed. He would have known that forever this would that anyone who survived in the Kingsguard would look down on him, and yet he did it seemingly just because it was the right thing to do. So it's an odd form of heroism to say murdering the king, breaking your vows was heroic, but maybe it was that. It certainly saved the most lives. Question from Cloaked One, again, picking up for Nagul. Who was the real winner of the rebellion? Jon Arryn, Tywin? Again, depends on what you mean by the real winner. In terms of increase in power and situation, Robert Baratheon initially, definitely, he became king, but he realized that he didn't enjoy it. That wasn't what he was about. Jon Arryn rose to become Hand of the King. That was a big win for him. Tywin, probably, you'd have to say, gained the most. He had been, and this was like 3/4 of the way to the grand plan for Lannister control of the entire continent for him. When he took over as, or even before he took over as head of House Lannister, he mercilessly put down rebellions in the Westerlands, making sure that the Lannisters themselves were respected there. Then he got himself into the position of being Hand of the King, the Lannisters respected. That took a backward step, but then this meant that finally he managed to get his family married into the royal family. So his grandchildren would be sitting on the Iron Throne. And then following on from that, they would be in charge completely. So this was, I think, from a purely realpolitik kind of who gained the most power, I think Tywin Lannister has to be the one. AK Channel TV saying, it seems unlikely that even the Kingsguard could have turned the tide, especially with Robert's skill and armies. Here's to all the rest of it, Robert. Well, cheers to that. This does, I don't think I've got a question on it, so I'll just sort of pick up on this now. This does raise the issue about the 3 Kingsguard who are down in the Tower of Joy. There were 2 to start with, and then the 3rd goes down to join them. They played no role in the war. Now, if they had, would this have made a difference? Now, the obvious thing to say is no, because they're only 2 or 3 men. But Arthur Dayne in particular was the finest swordsman there was by a long way. You can just read Jaime Lannister when he's talking about him. He's hagorific in the way he describes him. So great, like is a level above everybody else. So if he had been in the right place at the right time, if he had been facing Robert Baratheon in the Battle of the Trident, would he have killed Robert Baratheon? It's possible. Robert Baratheon was a force of nature at the time, but Arthur Dayne was astonishingly good at fighting. So maybe. And if Robert Baratheon had fallen, would the rest of the Northern Army fall? Possibly. It's hard to say, but what it is very clear is that there were moments in the war when if you had 1 or 2 people in different places, maybe the Battle of Stony Sept, or just before Stony Sept, when you get the 3 leaders of the rebellion there at the Eyrie going their separate ways, exposed on their own, maybe that would have made a difference. Who knows? It's all conjecture, but yes, the fact that they were not involved was definitely significant. Kais Ballerina saying, why would Shojon be exiled for the tyrant Danny, but Jaime remain a Kingsguard for killing the tyrant Aerys? So this is why did Jaime remain a Kingsguard, member of the Kingsguard, for killing Aerys, but Jon was exiled on the show for killing Danny. well, these are two separate situations. In the books with Jaime, that it's pretty clear in my mind. I've said it already that the biggest winner in terms of power was Tywin Lannister. Would Tywin Lannister have let Jaime Lannister be sent to the wall? No, never, ever, ever. So that was not going to happen. That's why Jaime was kept, because the Lannisters were hugely important, and Robert Baratheon frankly didn't care about the details of who was where and who was in charge of what. He just, at the time, he just wanted to be king. So that's why Jaime Lannister was let off. Why was Jon on the show exiled? Because there was the way they set it up on the show. I'll let you decide the extent to which this will be the case in the books, but the way they set it up on the show was that there was still a huge number of loyalists to Dany left over, the Unsullied, the Dothraki, and they clearly wanted to have Jon killed for what he did. However, there were also a huge number of loyalists to Jon who survived, House Stark and all of their allies, which meant that the obvious middle course of action between let him off, he saved everybody, and kill him, he killed the queen, is let's exile him up to the wall. That's the logical middle ground. That's where they went on the show. As I say, I'll leave it up to you to decide whether or not that is the way that the book will go. Cloaked Juan picking up again. Thank you for picking up for Aidan Butler. How quickly could an empowered Tywin have quashed Robert's rebellion? Could Aerys have saved his own life and perhaps Rhaegar's indirectly by simply not taking Jaime as a Kingsguard? Okay, so this comes down to the fact that the final breakdown in Tywin and Aerys' relationship was Aerys making Jaime a member of the Kingsguard. This is because, although obviously great honor and all the rest of it, this meant that it took Jaime out of the succession of House Lannister. Jaime was supposed to succeed Tywin. When Tywin died, he obviously was this ideal blonde-haired, blue-eyed, charismatic guy who was going to lead House Lannister on to the next generation. If he didn't, who's the heir? Tyrion, and we know how much Tywin dislikes Tyrion. So Aerys deliberately taking Jaime out of the inheritance of House Lannister was a vindictive move, and that finally, ultimately severed the relationship between the two of them. If he hadn't done that, and therefore the relationship wasn't irrevocably destroyed, could Tywin have ended the war, quashed the rebellion? Well, I suspect that he probably would have done the same thing. He would have held back even before what happened with Jaime. Yes, that was the final straw, but even before that, there was the whole business with Joanna Lannister and Aerys, which was pretty horrific. There was the constant belittling of him. There was a huge amount of antagonism between the two. He had left as Hand of the King. He had gone back to Casterly Rock. There was a rift already. This was making Jaime a part of the Kingsguard was just the final nail in the coffin. I suspect he would have done exactly the same thing, even if that hadn't happened. But theoretically, if he was an ally, could he have stopped the war? Could he have stopped the rebellion? Yeah, probably. Because if he had joined forces, for example, with the Reach, just the next region along, and he had been there at that same battle with Mace Tyrell and Randall Tarley when Robert Baratheon was trying to head back north to rejoin his two allies. If Tywin Lannister had been there, there is no way on this planet that he would have allowed Robert Baratheon to escape after that first defeat. He would have followed him down. He would not have allowed Mace Tyrell's army to head on down to King's Landing and just ignore Robert Baratheon. I think that that would have been very, very different at that point. And without Robert Baratheon, then would the others have sued for peace? It's entirely possible. I think that that's the point at which Jon Arryn, Ned Stark, Hoster Tully, they were very pragmatic. Hoster Tully and Jon Arryn were very political. Ned would have had an interest in what happened with Lyanna, obviously, but if they could have sorted all of that stuff out, maybe some kind of peace could have been brokered and the rebellion could have been shut down. Question again from Cloak Juan. Off topic, but would you mind sharing who did your new branding and artwork? Whoever they are, it looks amazing. Yes, I'm very, very happy to. I've got all the details over on Instagram. If you want to go and check that out, I will make sure afterwards they are linked down in the description to this video. The guy's name is a guy called Milos, who has done the work for me. Everything you see is hand drawn, and I know that he's very happy to take on other commissions as well. And I would highly recommend him and his work. I will put links down to all of his things in the description, and everyone can go and check him out later. So yeah, the new branding, I love it. I'm really glad you love it as well. It works just perfectly for me. Question from Jay Sheth saying, there is a theory about Jon Arryn and Doran Martell devising a plan to slowly erode Tywin's power through economy and then military over the course of years. What do you think about it? I mean, possibly. There are possibilities that are never fully explored in the world of Ice and Fire. Maybe if we ever got Fire and Blood Part 2, we might get a little bit more on this. But there are possibilities that Rhaegar and Tywin had, if not an understanding, then they had a mutual understanding that Aerys perhaps ought to be got rid of and Rhaegar made king. If that were the case, though, Tywin would want something out of this, and he wanted to marry Cersei into Rhaegar. That didn't happen. He instead married Elia Martell, so Rhaegar was tied in with the Martells. Would the Martells and the Lannisters be trying economically to get rid of Aerys? I mean, I don't think we've got the evidence of a plot. I think they both would have been happier if Rhaegar was in charge. I think they probably, if you sort of go down these kind of corridors of what if, and you say maybe the tourney at Harrenhal, Aerys hadn't turned up, Rhaegar had just done everything he'd planned, got everyone on his side. I suspect definitely the Martells would have been on his side. I suspect Tywin probably would have come in as well. And if they could have got the reach there and then persuaded at least someone in that other block to come in with them, then yes, I think that Rhaegar could probably have taken over. So I don't think the long-term plan was, I think Rhaegar had a slightly shorter-term plan. Question from Hampus Trot Beranda saying, what if Bran becomes king through walking into Jon and pushing Jon to ghost and going beyond the wall? Bran will be on the Isle of Faces. What do you think? So hang on, let's just work this one through. So Bran walks into Jon, pushes Jon into Ghost, and sends Ghost north of the wall. Bran becomes king on the Isle of Faces. Well, I think some of those things may well happen. I don't think the intentionality is there. I don't think Bran will become king through pretending to be John. If that's what you're suggesting, I don't think he will. I don't think John will take the throne. I think Bran will probably take the throne. There are, and for those who think, is this just a show thing that Bran becomes king? It seemed quite random. I know Aziz from History of Westeros, who knows as much about this world as anyone does, went through after the show. He went through and did another reread, looking specifically for whether there was any foreshadowing about Bran being king, and found a lot. So the foreshadowing is there for Bran becoming king. I think John will go into Ghost at some point, but that will be after his death, not because he gets pushed there by Bran. And I don't think that John himself will become king. Ultra Violence saying, do you think Rhaegar knew he would die going into the battle against Robert, a significantly more able-bodied warrior? No, I think quite the opposite. I think I've got a question on this a bit later, but before the battle, Jaime recalls that he had a conversation with Rhaegar before the battle, before Rhaegar left King's Landing, going up towards the Ruby Ford for the battle. Rhaegar came to Jaime and they talked, and Jaime said, when this battle's over, there's going to be big changes. When I win this battle, I'll come back and just keep an eye out, because things aren't going to stay the same around here. Clearly suggesting that A, Rhaegar thought he was going to survive, absolutely convinced he was going to survive, and B, if he did, he was going to be trying to get rid of Aerys as king. His plan was to become king himself afterwards. So no, I think that Rhaegar thought that he was going to win. I think that he thought that he was marked by destiny through prophecy, and I think that he had a very clear idea about what would happen. He was wrong. Rhaegar was wrong about a lot of things. He thought that he was Azor Ahai reborn. He was wrong. He thought that his son was Azor Ahai reborn. He was wrong. He thought that he would have a third child who would be a daughter who he could name after Visenya. He was wrong. He thought he would survive the battle. He was wrong. Rhaegar was wrong about a lot of stuff. He believed things very strongly, but he was wrong about a lot of things. Question from I did have another question in the chat. I can find it. Yep, here we go. This is from Eric. Do you think Tywin could have known about Rhaegar and Lyanna's love, maybe from Littlefinger, and therefore acted as he did to try to get Cersei and Robert to marry? I don't think so. I think that this was just I don't think Littlefinger needed to tell anyone else. I don't think he needed to tell anyone what actually happened. I think that his lie was enough to set the cats running, and I think that pushed events to war, and I think that he was very happy with that. I don't think he needed to get the Lannisters involved at all. That wasn't anything to do with his planning. So what was Tywin's motivation here? I don't think it was anything to do with caring about Rhaegar and Lyanna. I think this was purely a matter of waiting to see who was going to win. And once he knew who was going to win, that's when he decided whose side he was going to be on. And that's the point at which he had to show his absolute, in his mind, he had to show his absolute loyalty, which was why he raced to King's Landing and he killed the Targaryen children straight out to show, and then he did literally show Robert Baratheon. He said, look, dead children, that's how much I'm on your side. I killed these children. So it's gruesome, but this is exactly how Tywin works. Question from Chelsea Oliver. Do you think if certain things had not happened in the run-up, I know Rhaegar and Lyanna meeting changed things for the Starks, would the rebellion have even happened? Well, when you say certain things had not happened, so the continent was set for war, is my take on the situation. It was set for war because of the creation of a great northern alliance between those four regions. Think first, if you're a historian, think kind of First World War. This was the creation of power blocks, which means that all you need is like any one bit of either power block to cause damage against the other, and then you're going through dominoes and ending towards civil war. So the creation of these two power blocks made war seem a whole lot more inevitable, like it did before the Dance of the Dragons, when you get two power blocks, like it did before the Blackfire Rebellion, the first Blackfire Rebellion, again, two power blocks. So once you get that, it's ready for war. It was, as I said earlier, the Rhaegar and Lyanna thing, yes, it was a catalyst, but even without that, what the Aerys did to Ned's father and brother and to Jon Arryn's heir was enough to spark the war. There was no way out after that. There was nothing. What else could Ned Stark do? His father had been killed. His brother had been killed by Aerys. He had to declare war. He couldn't just sort of sit at home. He could maybe declared independence, but that would make him look weak. He had to honor demanded. The same for Jon Arryn. Robert Baratheon, he and Ned were closer than brothers. Could he really abandon Ned? This was the real cause of war. Rhaegar and Lyanna, yes, it was important, but that's not the real thing that caused this. Question from Jay Chef saying, were Doran and Jon Arryn working closely to defeat Tywin after the rebellion, a plan devised when Jon Arryn went to speak with Doran? No, I don't think so. So this is Doran Martell and Jon Arryn. So Tywin after the rebellion. Let's talk a bit about House Martell's position here. I think this is probably the best way to approach this. House Martell, Elia Martell was Rhaegar's wife, and the two Targaryen children who were murdered were her children. They were Martell children. Also, another member of the Kingsguard was a Martell. The Martells were hugely linked in with the Targaryens in this war, particularly with Team Rhaegar. Now, when the Tywin came in and did murder the Elia and the two, I mean, it wasn't him personally, but his people, he arranged for the murder of Elia and her two children. This made the Martells livid, as you would imagine, absolutely livid. And Oberyn, who we meet much later in the Song of Ice and Fire, he is so angry, he goes around trying to raise up an army himself to take on Tywin. This much we know. Jon Arryn, newly appointed Hand of the King, has a problem because they've only just achieved peace, and already we've got the Martells raising an army, and not against the king, but against the father of the king's wife. So this immediately opens up the prospect of another civil war. What does Jon Arryn do? Well, he has to stop it. So he goes to talk to Doran Martell. Doran is also livid, is also hugely angry about what happened to Elia, hates the Lannisters. But whereas Oberyn is all action, is all hot-tempered, is all, I have to do this now, I have to get personal vengeance, Doran is a lot more cold, calculating, thinking in the long term. Jon Arryn goes to Doran, and he talks him down, and he persuades him that actually this is not going to work. This is just going to lead to the more conflict. And Doran persuades Oberyn that they will get their revenge. They will get revenge on the Targaryens, and the way that they will do that is get their revenge on the Lannisters, and the way that they will do that is by marrying back into the Targaryens who are still alive. Two of them escaped, Viserys and Daenerys. So he arranges in secret for his daughter to marry Viserys, the new king in exile. That is what happened. This wasn't Jon Arryn and Doran coming up with a plan against Tywin. And I think as good an evidence as any is if they did, what was the plan and where? We don't see any evidence of it. This was Doran Martell coming to an agreement with his brother that they're going to do this over the long term, not in the short term, because the short term will not work because the Lannisters are in such a strong position. Once that whole marriage pact has ended with the death of Viserys, that's the point at which Oberyn says, okay, that's not going to work. Can I do my thing now? And Doran says, okay. And that's why Oberyn ultimately goes to King's Landing, because the agreement he had with Doran Martell has come to an end. He is now going to get his revenge on the Lannisters. And in a way, he does. Question from Stephanie Frederick saying, what is everyone drinking tonight? I've got mint tea. I've got a glass of water. But as always, I have a nice glass of Dornish Red for once. I lined up for once I finish. Now we've got a question from Kyle Menzies saying, love your channel so much. Simply amazing Game of Thrones chat. Thank you very much indeed. The chat is an excellent place to be. If you're watching live and you've never got involved in the chat, do just pop in and say hi. Very, very friendly, helpful, and insightful people there in the chat. Question from Trigo. Didn't see a question attached to that one. If there is one, could you pop it in the chat, and one of the moderators will try and pick it up and highlight it for me. Okay, let's go back to some questions for my from my patrons. Let's go to Matthew Hawkins saying, dear Robert, Aerys II Targaryen had both Rickard Stark and his heir Brandon killed. He must have known this would cause the North to revolt. Was he just totally insane by then, or do you think Bloodraven influenced him to do it? Well, I think the short answer is that, yeah, he was. I don't like bandying around the word mad, but he had become so obsessed by fire and hurting people that, yeah, this was just, he didn't think about the consequences. He wasn't thinking, oh, I wonder what the geopolitical implications of all this would be. That's not where he was at the time. So I think the former. Could Bloodraven have been influencing him? I think, although, yes, huge amounts of this are Bloodraven influencing events, the influence here is that we can see is to make sure that the right child gets born. That's the aim here. I don't see much evidence, and I'm as big a believer as anyone in Bloodraven influencing things all over the place. I don't see much evidence that Bloodraven would want there to be a massive civil war. I don't see much evidence that he prompted a massive civil war. I see evidence that he tried to make sure that Rhaegar and Lyanna got together and that they had a child. That's what I see his plan being. And I think that he didn't really care that much what happened around the outside. He just cared that that child survived. Once it became apparent there was a civil war, he made sure that the right person got there to make sure that the child survived. How? Howland Reed. Howland Reed, we know, was at the Isle of Faces. We know he's been in contact with the Weirwood Network. That means in contact with Bloodraven. He was the person suspiciously appearing at the Tourney of Harrenhal, and then suspiciously appearing at the end to go with Ned to the Tower of Joy, making sure Ned was the person who found baby John. So that's my thinking on Bloodraven's role. I don't think that he desperately wanted a civil war. That doesn't seem to be really his style. In fact, on longer term, I tend to the view that he wanted a strong Seven Kingdoms. He didn't want the Seven Kingdoms to be killing itself all the time. He was working in order to create the prince that was promised, Azor Ahai Reborn, who will help save humanity against the threat from the others. That agenda is advanced by having a strong humanity and by having that person of prophecy survive and be strong and be armed and knowledgeable. It's not served by everybody killing each other. Cole Carsnark saying Robert's Dornish Red should be a real thing. Yes, well, when I'm old and rich and famous, I shall buy myself a nice vineyard and I shall create some Dornish Red happily. So that's going to be there's a long-term aim. Caius Ballerina saying, if he can't be described as mad, who can be? I mean, fair. I mean, as I said, I'm not a big fan of the word mad myself, but I entirely understand where that's coming from. I think that's in Ed Pistemic saying, when in doubt, credit Howland. That I like it. Let's make that one catch on. Question from Lady Pushkin saying, hi, Robert. Just why didn't anyone say anything to stop all the misunderstanding and bloodshed? Perfect question. Why didn't anyone say anything to stop it? Well, who say what, which could have stopped the bloodshed, is the basic response to that. I've already gone into the fact that the Rhaegar and Lyanna thing, yes, that was a catalyst, but the war would have happened anyway. Pretty sure about that. If they'd come out and been open and honest and said, somehow managed to persuade everyone and cleared up all confusion, and let's not forget, communication is not the same there as it is now. You can't get the message out to everybody straight away. Mixed signals, ravens get shot down in times of war, lots of things. It's very complicated. People aren't where you send the raven to because they've moved on. This is not an easy thing to do. But if they did manage to spread out that hey, it's all a big mistake, don't worry, probably the war would still have carried on because Aerys II still had to be deposed. So I don't think that they could have said anything to persuade people. What about, is there anything that could have been said to do away with what the Mad King did, what Aerys did? I didn't think so. I mean, what if he says sorry? Does that change things? I don't think so. I think it's only if he said, I hereby abdicate, I realize I did lots of wrong and bad things and I'm going to go away. Maybe that could have stopped it. But I don't think there's any anything else that could have been said. Lady of Summer saying, I have been playing around with the idea that the root cause behind Aerys's paranoia is his own dragon dreams. I like to think that he dreamed of a white lion devouring a feeble, withered dragon. Yeah, so we don't, and this sort of the descent into madness is a thing that we don't get many causes of. it seems to have taken a turn for the worse after he was kept imprisoned during the Defiance of Duskendale. But the trajectory seems to already have been there. This seems to be, I mean, partly a result of his Targaryen heritage, partly, frankly, the result of inbreeding by the Targaryens over a long period of time, partly a result of having huge privilege. No one ever said no to him. That must be he grew up in that situation where he could have anything he wanted. People would give him anything he wanted. No one would ever refuse him. That is not a healthy environment for people to grow up in. So um, I don't think there's a need for there to be anything like Dragon Dreams. And we're not told that there's anything like Dragon Dreams. But this seems very Targaryen. It seems to be very much fire and blood that is driving him in its own way. He gets obsessed by fire and burning and killing and hurting. And this, the thing with the Targaryens, when we talk about the Tyrion says about the flipping the coin and, whether they're going to be good or bad Targaryens, that's not really how it is, because a lot of them start off quite good. Aerys, frankly, started off quite good, and then the trajectory goes worse. It seems to have happened with even Aegon the Fifth. Certainly happened here. There's a few other examples of where it happened. Maybe that's what's happening with Daenerys in the story. That's certainly what George R. R. Martin has hinted. But this isn't just about a person going bad. Dragon Dreams, yes, is one thing, but this is, if we buy into this idea, that I think we do now, that the Targaryens, the Valyrians, the Dragon Riders, did a bit of what we might call gene splicing. So there is a tiny bit of dragon in the Targaryens, and that, yes, they appear human, but there are some bits of them that are just a bit dragonish. And so this descent into madness actually is them giving over to that part of them that is dragonish. And for a dragon, it's not mad or bad or wrong or anything to love fire. That's just a natural part of what a dragon is, or to eat things, or to cause hurt and pain. That is just what dragons do. So if we aren't going to make a moral judgment about a dragon burning people, then should we make a moral judgment about a human who is part dragon? I'm not saying we shouldn't. We probably should, definitely should. But I think George R. R. Martin wants in our minds to be going, these aren't just normal humans. There's something dragonish about them. But yeah, so that's my take on what's going on there. I don't think it's just being driven crazy by Dragon Dreams or anything along those lines. Question. Chokin Hagar saying, inbred, inbent, inbroken. Good. Question from Lauren Mintz saying, hello, Robert and moderators. My question is about Lyanna and Rhaegar. Why did they keep their relationship a secret? Prince Rhaegar was the crown prince. Everyone knows Targaryens followed their own rules back then. Look at Aegon IV. Even if Lord Stark disapproved of the situation, what would he have done? It would have been known as a mutual elopement, not a kidnapping. It wouldn't have caused the same ruckus. So why didn't they just come out about what actually happened? I feel like it would have turned out better if they just told the truth at any point before Rhaegar left for the Trident. Well, I've already gone through the ground of why I don't think that would necessarily have made much difference. A couple of people in the chat have made the entirely valid point as well. Robert Baratheon wouldn't have paid any attention. He just would have just carried on anyway, regardless of what they said. He had it very clear in his mind what was going on, and I don't think that anyone would been able to persuade him otherwise. But there's another layer to this, which is that this was a complex political situation. Leaving the war alone for one moment, Rhaegar, he had a political marriage to Elia. They weren't in love, they liked each other, they got on well, but it was a political marriage. Now, yes, there was precedent for Targaryens to have more than one wife, but that was some time ago, and that was generally frowned upon even then, particularly by the faith and by also a lot of other people. The fact that lots of Targaryens had lots of mistresses is probably not written. That's what effectively what Aegon IV had. Aerys did as well in his younger days, Aerys II. And there were some examples from the earlier days, people like Aegon the Conqueror, Maegor the Cruel, who had more than one wife. So there was precedent there, but not real recent precedent for more than one marriage. The Martells were actually quite open about open relationships. They had a completely different approach. So whereas we may go into looking at what Elia's thoughts about all of this, or the Martells' thoughts about all of this, if Rhaegar was going off with another woman, they were probably actually a lot more relaxed than you might think that they are. They grew up. Oberyn Martell, well known to have many paramours, and Elia looked up to him. That was her brother. She looked up to him hugely. They were really close, those two. So she didn't think that this was a problem in any way, shape, or form. Indeed, the children from Oberyn's many relationships were afforded an equal place in court as any true-born children, so to speak. So there was, in Dawn, this wasn't an issue. But what was an issue was obviously the succession, because you get Elia's two children were next in line after Rhaegar, and if Rhaegar had another child or more children with another woman, then that would potentially cause problems. So various things had to be squared off first. There had to be an agreement with Doran Martell. There had to be some sort of agreement with the High Septon as well, because whatever's going on, if they wanted to annul the marriage with Elia or have another marriage, if there was anything along those lines, then it had to be agreed with the High Septon. And the Martells had to be completely on board with this. The fact that they were in communication with the Martells, I think, is very clear. We're not told it exactly, but we are told that the Martells held their troops back from this war. They were waiting for something. And where was it that the Tower of Joy was? Where was it that Rhaegar went to hide away? He went to Dorne. And he didn't go somewhere where nobody would ever find him. He went, there's the main pass, the Prince's Pass between Dorne and the rest of the Seven Kingdoms. He went to one of the watchtowers on that. In a time of war, that was watched. People will have known. House Fowler were in charge of that. They will have been aware. One of their watchtowers had been taken over by Rhaegar, some members of the Kingsguard, and Lyanna was there as well. This would have been known. This would have been communicated to the Martells. The Martells will have been wanting to know what's going on there. Why is our sister's husband there with another woman? What's going on? If they were angry about this in any way, there was no way that Rhaegar would have gone to Dorne. That much is very clear. He would not have stayed somewhere where they knew where he was in Dorne. That much is very clear. He was in negotiations with them. And so I think that he was holding back. They were holding back until they'd got everything agreed, and then they were going to announce it. But events kept rolling forward, and eventually Rhaegar had to get involved. And he seems to be very much, okay, so I'll win this battle, I'll win the war, get that out of the way, then we'll get back to the plan. It's almost as if the war is a distraction for him. That's not the thing he's really focused on. He just wants to get that out of the way and then get back to his plan. So that's what seems to have been happening in all of that, and that is why they did not say something. The other element of why they did not say something is this a bit about communications, and it's about timing, because when they got together outside Harrenhal and headed off down to the Tower of Joy, if they went there directly, that would have taken them at least 4 weeks, probably. They're not going on the main roads. They're heading across country. They're deliberately not going to be staying near people. This is quite rough terrain. Events moved very quickly. Straight after this, Brandon charged down the King's Road to King's Landing. He was captured within 2 weeks. It was just another 2 weeks after that that we get Rickard down in King's Landing, and they're both killed. It was immediately after that that the Red Keep sent out the Ravens demanding that Ned and Robert come to King's Landing as well, and immediately after that, effectively, war was declared. So what the situation was that Rhaegar and Lyanna met up. They headed, if they went straight to the Tower of Joy, which is not 100%, we do not know. They may have gone, I have a random theory that they could have gone via Harrenhal, not Summerhall even. But even if they went there direct, by the time they got there, by the time they'd got information from people, the war was already started. Ned had disappeared, was going off to rally the banners of the North. Robert Baratheon was steam coming from his ears, charging around, fighting anyone in the way. This could not be stopped. So the timing of it was, the descent into war was so quick that actually they couldn't stop a war. They might as well let it go on for a little while and then intervene once they got everything sorted. Question from Ariel Winchester saying, "Hey Robert, I hope all is well. You've talked a few times about Rhaegar's last interaction with Jaime and how it shows how confident, borderline cocky, Rhaegar was at succeeding and winning." Yes, I was talking about that actually just a moment ago. Do you think this confidence came from his belief in prophecy and his role within the prophecy, or from his Targaryen/royal status? Also, how do you think Lyanna got the news that Rhaegar had been killed by Robert? Do you think Ned told her, or did the news reach her before Ned got there? Okay, so taking the first part of that first, why was he so confident? He was confident. Rhaegar was confident seemingly about everything. And I think this was a combination of both. I think there was an absolute belief in his role in prophecy. I think that he thought that was definitely going to happen. And also, the same thing that I said about Rhaegar, about Aerys, applies to Rhaegar. He was born in great privilege. No one ever said no to him. Everyone always treated him as being this amazing person, and frankly, he was quite amazing. He was knowledgeable. He was a great singer who brought people to tears when he wrote songs and then sang his songs. And when he was a great jouster as well, as far as we can tell, although there are hints that would people really defeat him in a joust, Crown Prince? They definitely wouldn't want to risk accidentally killing the Crown Prince, so maybe it was slightly easier for him and he did not realize it at the time. But he was incredibly confident, and 90% of it was deserved. And added to all of that, he believed in prophecy. he was very wrong about almost every bit of prophecy he believed, but he believed it absolutely. As for the second part of the question, how did Lyanna get the news that Rhaegar had been killed by Robert? Do you think Ned told her, or did the news reach her before Ned got there? Well, the only bit of information we have about this is Ned's fever dream. Now, Ned's fever dream, we've been told by George R. R. Martin, we should not take Ned's fever dream as being literal truth. So we can't read it and saying that's exactly what happened. But I think it is there to impart thematic truths to us. And the message seems to be they weren't, or they were sort of expecting Ned. That seems to be the case. There wasn't a, what are you doing here? They seem to be expecting him. There seems, when Ned talks about the Battle of the Trident, they don't seem to bat an eyelid at it. This doesn't seem to be news to them, that they being the Kingsguard. All of that conversation boils down to Ned saying, why weren't you at any of these other places? And them saying, we keep our promises. And there is no hint there that they're going, wait, so hang on a moment. Are you trying to tell us that Rhaegar's dead? There's nothing of that. And if that had happened, I suspect that would have seeped into Ned's subconscious and therefore into the fever dream. We can't take it as literal truth, but the hints that we have are that this wasn't news to them when they got there. So they heard about it. How could they have heard about this beforehand? Well, obviously everybody will have wanted to know what was going on. And the news of what happened to Rhaegar definitely got to King's Landing. It got to King's Landing. There were still sympathizers for Team Rhaegar in King's Landing, Elia not least. And who might she have been in contact with? Well, her lady in waiting was Ashara Dane, the famous Ashara Dane, who was at the time just a few miles away from the Tower of Joy back home at Starfall. So that seems to be, I'm not going to get into the details of that. I've done the videos if you're interested. That seems to be the supply line for the Tower of Joy, Starfall. That House Dane seems to be the people who are supplying it, because it's just a watchtower. They were there for many months. They will have needed supplies. House Dane seems to have been the people who are doing it. So messages could have gone from the battle to King's Landing to Starfall, Starfall to the Tower of Joy. And that seems not just what could have happened, but you'd have thought that actually seems very likely that that's what happened. And if it's kind of backed up by the fact that this doesn't seem to be a surprise to them when Ned effectively says, by the way, did you know Rhaegar's dead? Lyle Hammock saying, I have recently completed your Robert's Rebellion playlist, and I'm wondering why Rhaegar suggested to reach out to Tywin Lannister. He had to be aware of what had happened between them and suspect he was more likely to turn against Aerys than support him. Is it possible that he was going to use Tywin to assist him deposing his father? Thank you for your excellent content. Yeah, so I think this is entirely possible, Lyle. I think so. What you're alluding to there is that Rhaegar has sat out most of the war. Then you get this defeat in the Battle of Stony Sept, after which Aerys finally says, okay, we need to get Rhaegar. And he sends Gerald Hightower to go and get Rhaegar. Rhaegar comes, turns up. He has some probably very awkward meetings with his father, and he says, I think you should try to get Tywin on side. I think you should ask for him to come in and help. Why did he do that? Well, I think, frankly, although Rhaegar was confident of victory, Tywin was the most powerful lord in the land, and therefore he should, if the Targaryens were going to survive, he had to be kept on side. But longer term, yes, Rhaegar seems to be plotting the idea that after the war, he's going to take over. And I think that he knows that given the choice, Tywin would have gone for Rhaegar rather than Aerys as king. So is he suggesting that Tywin gets called in to help put down the rebellion? Yes, I think he is. But he also has an eye on the future beyond the rebellion. And he's thinking, this is somebody who can help me longer term. He's got the Martells on side. He has the Lannisters on side. He's a good part of the way there. Question from Reflective Rambling, picking up for Aidan Butler. Thank you very much. Barristan says Ashara was dishonoured at the tourney. He danced with Jon Con, Oberyn, and Ned. The latter two are dead. Could this slight cost Jon Con / Fagon an alliance with Dany? So, okay, there are many layers to this. Barristan says Ashara Dane was dishonoured. Now, this is... So Barristan is firstly, he seemed to have a crush, more than a crush. He seems to be secretly in love with Ashara Dane. Secondly, he seems to be very prudish. He's been a member of the King's Guard ever since he was very young. And he's got these very kind of old school concepts of honor. So when he says that she was dishonored, that doesn't necessarily mean that she was actually what we might consider to be dishonored. It might simply mean that she slept with someone. And he thinks that that is, from a noble knight's perspective, somebody sleeping with a noble lady outside of wedlock is dishonoring her. That is what his thinking is. So that is almost certainly what happened. Ashara Dane slept with somebody at the tourney at Harrenhal. We're told this, that at the tourneys, then everybody's at it. We're told it raises nothing raises the blood like battles and tourneys. I think one character somewhere says. So this seems to have been what happened. So, but Barristan disapproves of it because of his own personal morality. When she's saying she danced with Jon Con, Oberyn, and Ned, the latter two are dead. Could this slight cost Jon Con and Fagon an alliance with Dany? I don't think there's a link there. So the so Barristan isn't the person who was noticing who Ashara Dane was dancing with. The person who was noticing who Ashara Dane was dancing with was Howland Reed. And without going into all of my Howland and Ashara theorizing, what Ashara Dane got up to at the tourney at Harrenhal, one of the biggest sources is what we hear from the two kids of Howland Reed, Mira and Jojen, and they're talking to Bran, and they tell this tale about the lad and the maiden, and everybody else in the story has got a nickname based on their house. You get the young wolf, you get the griffin, you get the young dragon, whatever it is. Everybody's got a nickname, the white sword, that is connected with symbolically with who they are, apart from the maiden and the lad. These are the main characters in this story. The lad is clearly Howland Reed. The maiden is clearly Ashara Dane. And we hear about who Ashara Dane danced with. We hear about what her hair looked like, the color of her eyes. And this is the story that has been told many times to the Reed children. And this, I think, is incredibly good soft storytelling, because this reads like a How I Met Your Mother story. This reads, why on earth would Howland Reed tell his kids repeatedly this story about him and Ashara Dane and how hot she was? She was amazing. These are the exact people in this order that she danced with there at that thing. This is what she looked like. This is what she was wearing. That it would be incredibly weird to tell that story to your children if you then turn around and say, and then like a year later, I met your actual mother. That it only really works as a parent telling their children if this is a story about How I Met Your Mother, in my view. So that's not, I think, going to be a matter of costing the an alliance between Fagon and Daenerys. I think this is more to do with whether what's going to cost that alliance is the fact that Fagon is going to claim the throne. He's going to be sitting on the throne. He will then be Dany will then suspect and perhaps prove in some way that he is not a true Targaryen. That's where that's going to go in my view. But yeah, all the things that Sir Barristan says, you have to interpret them through his own moral point of view. Luke Morano saying, was Aerys saying burn them all, referring to him burning his family at the fire of Summerhall, maybe like Bran did to Hodor in the show? Well, this is a show thing, the burn them all thing. That's what he said on the show, which is great, and it is and the link, and I think I probably did a video in the old days of linking this. It felt very much like Hold the Door, Burn Them All, and I think I can even remember theorizing perhaps that this was him having some visions, Bloodraven getting in contact with him, giving him visions of the Whites and the White Walkers, and all he could remember and say from it is burn them all, which it's a long time ago. I quite enjoyed coming up with those kinds of theories. But in terms of the books, it doesn't seem to be quite like that. Burn them all, the relationship with, and I've already talked through where Aerys got into his state of mind there. So I'm not going to go down there, but in terms of the Summerhall, I'll happily touch on this. What caused the fire at Summerhall is a fascinating question. We're not going to get the answer to that, I personally think, until the end of the Dunk and Egg stories, if at all. So what caused it? Well, there are two people realistically who had a motivation to do this. One of them was Aerys, who it then put him, he didn't inherit the kingdom straight away, but just a couple of years later he did. So this sort of bumped him up the family tree. Jaehaerys actually did inherit because of all the people he died, or Bloodraven, because he had been very clearly trying to get the royal line coming down through Jaehaerys and then Aerys to Rhaegar. That was what he was wanting to do and trying to do. So it worked perfectly for him to be getting rid of the current king plus the heir who could, or the ex-heir, Duncan Targaryen, the firstborn son of King Aegon, who could potentially have produced a rival claimant with Targaryen blood. So who out of those two is probably more likely? At the time, Aerys seems to have not been really a very Bernie kind of person. So it doesn't seem likely that it's him. For me, I did a video on this if you want all of my thinking on it, but for me, Bloodraven is the most likely candidate. He had an agent there, the Woods Witch. He had the a reason to be doing it. So he had motive, means, and opportunity. And it could look like an accident. So maybe it was an accident. It's entirely possible. We couldn't rule that out. But if anyone did it deliberately, I think it probably was Bloodraven. Question from somebody was talking about Dunk's foot. I can't see that now, but I will just very quickly pick up on Dunk's foot because I think this is a really interesting point. So Dunk saves people at the tragedy at Summerhall. We don't know who, how, but clearly they were important people because George Martin has written it deliberately in a way that we do not know who or how. But my guess is, given the context, these were important people. This presumably is allowing the birth of baby Rhaegar, because Rhaegar was born there. Partly tinfoil perhaps, but there has to be something at the end of Dunk's story to wrap this up. His foot, he ponders his foot, which seems like an odd thing to do, but it is his foot that was the cause of the death of Prince Maekar, who would have been a good king, probably, because he kicked Aerion, who was being mean to someone, more than mean to someone, that Dunk cared about. And that led to the trial of the Seven. And as a result of that, the prince died. And this was all because of Dunk's fault. And Dunk ponders a lot about his foot, and his foot is saved. Would he give up his foot to save the life of a prince? That kind of thing. Is his foot there to save the kingdom? How could he pay back the debt owed in some way? I suspect something like he puts his foot in a door to prevent it from shutting, and that saves the life of the about to be born Rhaegar. That would tie everything up very well. But thematically, what happened was you get the birth of a dragon, Rhaegar, at Summerhall. We have dragon eggs. They were trying to hatch dragon eggs. They didn't actually manage to hatch the eggs themselves. They have fire, and we have king's blood sacrifices. The actual king, the first son of the king, and Dunk, who symbolically, a king died for his life, so he is a substitute for a king. 3 king's blood sacrifices, allowing the real dragon to be born, Rhaegar. Plum Kettle saying, "Hi Robert, this subject is fascinating. Thank you for all your excellent work." Well, thank you very much. I hugely appreciate that. Andrew K saying, "Speaking of Dunk and Egg in Deep Geek, do you suspect that not long after the Winds of Winter, the She-Wolves of Winterfell could come out, given it was slated for release in an anthology series years ago?" Yeah, I think so. He has written some of the She-Wolves of Winter, as far as we can tell. He has said he is not going to release anything until he's finished off the Winds of Winter, and that will be the next thing. He should go straight into A Dream of Spring, but I suspect that he will want some sort of break between the two whenever he finally does finish the Winds of Winter. So yes, I think that he will very quickly finish off the next Dunk and Egg story and then pile straight on into the Winds of Winter. Okay, question from Sebastian Schumala. saying, "Hi, Robert. Why didn't Robert Baratheon go with Ned to look for Lyanna? The whole rebellion started because of Lyanna's disappearance and alleged kidnapping. He had just killed Rhaegar, and then what? To put it in Game of Thrones terms, did he kind of forget? He obviously had to consolidate power and get crowned, but Robert, being an impulsive person to start with, doesn't sound to me as the guy who would do the reasonable thing and claim the throne first, but rather wander off in search of his missing fiancée. Why didn't he go searching for Lyanna himself?" Okay. The iteration of events around that period, I think, is important. So Ned gets there first to King's Landing. Robert follows afterwards. They have a row about the dead Targaryen children. That very day, we're told, Ned stormed out with his army to go down to Storm's End. Robert Baratheon had been injured, and yet he was rushing down. So he did still need to just stop and relax. He needed to consolidate where his claim. He, at some point during that period, Ned will have found out where Lyanna was. Robert Baratheon did not know where Lyanna was, and those who did know had absolutely no motivation whatsoever in telling Robert Baratheon where she was, because they know what would have happened. He would have just gone straight in there, and if he found she had a child, if he found that she had, in his eyes, betrayed him, who knows? He could have killed her. This would have been messy. Then what would Ned have done? It's the lands of what if. But nobody had any motivation for telling Robert Baratheon where Lyanna was when Ned was already on the way there. It was only 2 weeks down to Storm's End, and then he immediately headed off after that over to the Tower of Joy. So why didn't he go himself? Because Ned was there, because he had to stay in order to, if he wanted to become king, which he claimed, then he had to hang around and consolidate it. And fundamentally, even though they'd had an argument, then he trusted Ned, I think, that's the fundamental thing. The thing about Robert Baratheon, he's hot-tempered, he's impetuous, but he forgets them in the morning. He forgets it in the morning. Ned brooded over things, Robert didn't. And he will have thought, Ned's gone off, he's going to get Lyanna and bring her back to me. And I think he had absolute trust. If Ned had spent a long time, then I'm sure he would have gone off and done something himself. But as it was, he did have to be in King's Landing. He had been wounded in the previous battle, and there were lots of things that he had to be doing while he was there, and Ned was on the case. So I don't think there was a need for him to be doing it. And Simon Erickson said, I think it's an insightful point as well in the chat, saying, because at that point, Robert was not motivated by love for Lyanna, but by hate towards Rhaegar and other Targaryens. I think that's a very insightful point. Yeah. Fitz saying, I really love it when I can catch these live. Welcome, Fitz. Great to see you there in the chat. Sebastian Holden, thank you for the super sticker. I appreciate that. Agree Weirwood saying, I hope She Wolves of Winterfell is done. I think it has a bearing on why the North doesn't remember. I mean, I would like it to, but I don't know whether it will. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. This is why the North does not remember is, I think, a much longer term thing rather than just what happened to Dunk and Egg when they went up to Winterfell. But hey, who knows? I think George R. R. Martin is definitely using the Dunk and Egg series to be teaching us little bits of extra information, background lore about the world that can help us understand and shed new light on the Song of Ice and Fire. So maybe he does. Prairie Sky, welcome to you too. Mara Lee, hi there, Mara, by the way, saying, if Lord Tywin Lannister had remained loyal to Aerys, how would this have affected the way the war finally ended? Would House Targaryen still be sitting on the Iron Throne to this day or not? So I started talking about this a little bit earlier, but let's do this kind of mapping out. If he had remained loyal from the beginning, then yes, I think he definitely could have changed it. I think he could have taken on Robert Baratheon's army in the south, which was the most tenuous point in the plan. Let's put it, a precarious point in the plan of the rebels. Robert Baratheon was completely isolated from his allies down in the Stormlands and trying to work his way across from beneath King's Landing, above Dorne, and trying to avoid both the Reach and the Westerlands would have been an incredibly hard thing to do. The fact that Dorne stayed out of it, the fact that the Reach seemed to want to pretend to be involved but not actually be involved did help. But if Tywin was involved, I don't think he would have got away with that. So he would have been killed. I think that there would have then been a different feel to that meeting at Riverrun, the meeting which joined the Northern forces all together in marriage between the Starks and the Tullys and the Tullys and the Arryns. That would have made the whole thing feel very, very different, because the Baratheons largely at that point would have been out of it. Stannis was besieged in Storm's End. He couldn't come out. There was no one else to command the forces of the Baratheons. It really was just those three guys there, the Arryns, the Tullys, and the Starks. Would they want to take on, if the Martells could be brought into action, would they be willing to, would those three forces be able to take on the Reach, the Westerlands, the Dornish, and the Crown forces? I suspect not. So I think they would have at that point sued for peace. Prairie Sky, thank you very much for the super chat. Didn't see a question attached to that. I think you're just saying love your live streams. Well, thank you very much. I hugely appreciate it. Sydney Taylor saying, are you going to be watching Wheel of Time in November? Yes, definitely. I'm definitely going to be watching it. I'm thinking I'm probably not going to be covering it in huge amounts of detail, to be honest. Maybe one or two videos, but there are plenty of other excellent channels who will be covering it in more detail than that, I'm sure. I personally recommend the Dusty Wheel and Daniel Green. Do go and check them out. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. It's only 2 and a bit weeks away. It should be excellent. Kais Ballerina saying, do the Martells know about who Jon really is? Well, this is an interesting one. So the Martells know that the Lyanna and Rhaegar were there at the Tower of Joy. They will have known that they were together. It seems likely that they will have known that Lyanna was pregnant, but that's it. So I think they could have guessed that there was a child. They know that Lyanna died, and I think they must have guessed that the child died as well, but they didn't know things, but they might have been able to guess stuff. And that, I think, is the sort of the fuzzy line we have with a lot of characters around there. I think Littlefinger ultimately didn't know things, but he figured a lot of stuff out. Anyone who had the inclination and the knowledge could probably have put things together, that you get Rhaegar and Lyanna elope together. If they knew that she was pregnant, they knew that Ned arrived back with a child who's the right age. They could probably have figured stuff out, but in whose interest is it to actually out that? Because basically, Robert Baratheon would just kill the child. It didn't look like a Targaryen. If it didn't know, they didn't know that it was a Targaryen. Doesn't make huge amounts of difference in the grand scheme of things. So my inclination is to say they didn't know. They might have suspected, but they weren't. There was no real reason for them to investigate further or even suggest it to anyone. Lawnduck 20. Hello, Robert. How old was Renly during the rebellion, and what was his role, if any? Renly was 5, I think, during the rebellion. He's quite a bit younger than Stannis, so he was just a child, and his role, he was at Storm's End through it. So we often talk about Stannis of being there and Storm's End. He was left in charge of Storm's End, but Renly was there too. So Renly did experience the same thing, but he was very young. So it won't have left huge amounts of scarring, perhaps, or I don't know, depends on your interpretation of child psychology. Maybe it would have left even more scarring. But the point that I would pick up about his age is not so much what happened during the war, but what happened after the war. Because Robert Baratheon becoming king, until he had children, the heir presumptive was Stannis. And what he did was he said to Stannis, you get Dragonstone, go and live there. Nobody would. The Targaryens like Dragonstone. Nobody else liked Dragonstone. It is literally smelly. It is rocky. It has sulfurous gases coming up from the ground all the time. It is dark. It is dank. There's a kind of a smog or hanging around it. It is not a nice place for anyone who is not a bit dragony. So Stannis took this as an insult that he was given it, but he couldn't do much about it. And Renly was left in Storm's End, which means that for his character, whereas Stannis spent the next 10, 15 years growing more and more bitter about what happened to him and how unfair it all was, Renly grew up from being a child, being in undisputed control of Storm's End. And he was the ruler of the Stormlands. And that is how he grew up in this pampered existence, effectively. So that is another element in the kind of psychologies of the two Baratheons who were Robert Baratheon's two brothers, is that Stannis got Dragonstone and Renly was the ruler of Storm's End from the age of 5. Reflective rambling saying, I would love to see Dragonstone in its glory. I would love to visit Dragonstone. I would not want to live there. Vinny saying, hello, Robert. Actually, no, before I get onto that one, there was Lawnduck 20. You had another question. In a Barristan POV, he thinks to himself that if he were there when Robert smiled at the presentation of dead Targaryen children, he would have killed him. Yet he still accepted his place as Lord Commander in the King's Guard. Why did he stay with Robert if he knew this? Well, this is one of those times when George R.R. Martin is very careful with his language. The exact thing that Sir Barristan thinks, this is in one of his, I think it's the Kingbreaker chapter, the exact thing that he thinks is, I was not there when those children were presented to Robert Baratheon. He wasn't there. He was injured even worse than Robert Baratheon was. Robert Baratheon had to rest up for a couple of days before heading down to King's Landing. Barristan had to rest up for a couple of weeks. So he was not there, he thinks. But he often wondered how Robert Baratheon reacted when he saw those bodies. If he had smiled, he didn't think that he'd have been able to stop himself from killing him. That's what he thinks. So it's not he thinks he would have killed him if he'd been there because he knew he smiled. He doesn't know if he smiled. And that has haunted him because he knows if he had seen him smile, then he would have killed him. So it's a slight nuance of what's going on, which means that he's so Barristan all the way through being Lord Commander to Robert Baratheon always has this doubt in the back of his mind. He is loyal, he serves the king, but he isn't 100% sure about him. So when he is dismissed and he gives all those great speeches and he storms out of the Red Keep, this is not actually, from his perspective, this is not a huge shift. This is just him going, actually, you know what? Just forget it all. These kings here, it was the Targaryens. Those were the kings that I swore to follow. Robert Baratheon, but for the fact that I was injured at the time, it's entirely possible that I would have killed him straight away. And that adds a completely different light to his loyalty to the non-Targaryen kings. Plum Kettle saying, in one of Jon's POV chapters, he imagines his mother to be highborn and beautiful. Do you think he will ever find out who his stents are? So he will find out. I think Marley, you also asked about how Jon will find out about his parents. So Jon wonders. This is a mystery all the way through the books. Jon wonders, particularly book one, almost every chapter about who his mother is. It's actually, again, it's a bit of misdirection from George R. R. Martin, because he is convinced he knows who his father is, but actually perhaps the better question for Jon should have been, who is my father? But because he's asking who is my mother all the time, it's implicitly buying into the story that Ned has told everyone, which means that we, as we're going through Jon's POV at the time, we're also implicitly buying into this idea that we're looking for who is Jon's mother, rather than thinking who are his mother and father. But that's by the way. Will he find out about his parents? Yes, he will. At some point, he will find out later on in the story. Obviously, on the show, this was a combination of Bran and Sam who found out. In the books, I still think probably the most likely character is Howland Reed. We will meet Howland Reed. George R. R. Martin has told us that we will meet Howland Reed later on. I think that there's a pretty good chance, and he said the reason why you haven't met him so far is because he knows too much. So when he does arrive, he will spill some secrets, and he will spill some secrets about what happened during Robert's Rebellion, at the Tourney of Harrenhal, at the Tower of Joy. So he, I think, is probably going to be the person who does this. Yes, Bran, once he has that information, can then go and have a look. But Bran, the way that they showed it on the show seems to be the way it is in the book in terms of his powers, in as much as he's not omniscient. Bran does not and will not know everything. He has access to all this knowledge, but he has to know where to look. So until somebody says to him, why didn't you go back and have a look at the Tower of Joy? There's no reason for him to go back and look at the Tower of Joy. So Bran has to have somebody to prompt him to do that. On the show, it was Sam. In the books, there's a good chance I think it will be Howland Reed. Nick Naylor saying Rhaegar was an idiot. I mean, maybe I wouldn't go quite that far, but he was certainly wrong about a lot of different things. Terra Incognita is saying Sam's not far from Starfall. He could learn some things. Yeah, he could. He is, but it's more. I mean, what he can learn at the Citadel is probably the biggest thing. He will be at the Citadel until the time that Old Town falls. At which point he will be heading north. That's so. I don't see a plot reason for him to be going to Starfall. IDK, the band IDK, saying just now tuning in, but I love your Lord of the Rings vids. Thanks for the great content. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I really enjoy making them. For those who don't know, who just know me from doing the Song of Ice and Fire stuff, I do Lord of the Rings videos as well. Also, The Witcher season 2 is coming up very soon. 17th of December, season 2 is going to be out. It will all appear at the same time on Netflix. Really looking forward to that. Reflective Rambling Chase was wondering about Traveler's Guide to the Witcher universe. I have thought about doing that. It's something I love doing, the Traveler's Guide. I think if you watch these live streams, I've answered the question a couple of times about Traveler's Guide to Middle Earth. My take is that the Tolkien estate would not be happy with that because it would veer too close to creating new fictional retellings of Middle Earth, which they come down very strongly on. But the Witcher world is probably okay. So I may well get around to that at some point. Vinny saying, hello, Robert. Just recently became a patron and I love your videos. Thank you very much. Gives me the opportunity. Patrons, thank you. Always say thank you. Always mean it. If you wish to support this channel, the best way to do it is by becoming a patron. There is a link to Patreon down in the description. If you are watching this live, one of the moderators, wherever the chat box is, will probably drop a link in there very helpfully at some point very soon. There are many patron benefits depending on your level. You get access to all the audio I do for my videos. I priority questions here on live streams. You get access to things like the audio narrations I did of the pre-release chapters of the Winds of Winter. At some of the high levels, a $30 level, then we get into more bespoke stuff. I've got a video coming up which is looking at a question one of my patrons wanted me to look at. So there are chances and opportunities to influence the content that I make, which actually brings me to I asked my $10 patrons, one of the benefits of that tier is you get to vote every now and then on what the future subjects of live streams will be, because I'm coming towards an end of this working through the history of the world of Westeros, effectively. We've got, I think I'll do one more, maybe two more. I definitely will be doing one on the War of the Five Kings. I may drop one other one in. But after that, my patrons have spoken, and we are going to be doing characters from the Dance of the Dragon. So characters that we will be seeing coming up in House of the Dragon, which is coming soon. So that's going to be happening, I would imagine, in 3 or 4 weeks' time. Okay, back to the questions. Catherine Furseth, you have argued that Ned's regret and sorrow over broken promises at the end of his life is related to him not being able to keep his word to Lyanna, that he would tell Jon about his true parentage. This makes sense, as Benjen at this point is missing, presumed dead, beyond the wall, and thus not able to tell Jon instead of Ned. But what about Howland Reed? Did he not know about Jon? Why doesn't Ned think he can tell Jon the truth? Thanks as always. Okay, so just the working theory here, and I did a video on this if you want further details, but the working theory is that there are clearly broken promises that Ned regrets, that it comes to him at the end of his life when he's in the black cells. And the context here is this is to do with Jon, because he immediately thinks about Jon. He thinks about broken promises. He thinks about Jon. And he says, if only he could sit John down and talk to him. So it's something he has to tell John. And when you kind of work through this, the most logical thing is that he made a promise. We know he made promises to Lyanna, not just a promise. He made promises to Lyanna. And it makes sense that one of those promises was to tell John about his true parentage. This, because he kept the main promise, to protect and save John. He did that, so there's no reason for him to be regretting and feeling bad about broken promises. So this seems to be a promise that he did break. He didn't tell John. Now, why Benjen is important here is because when John goes to the wall, Ned and Benjen don't talk. It's probably worth pointing out. On the show, they showed them with a much better relationship, but they don't talk. In the books, Benjen does come down, but there's clearly a tension between the brothers. But John, having had this suggestion, Ned having had this suggestion about John, he thinks about it, and then he says eventually, yes, but I want to talk to Benjen first. What would he have to talk to Benjen about? I mean, that yes, he could say look after him, but again, it opens up the possibility that he said to him, you have to tell him about his parentage. Benjen hints about they will talk when he returns. When John is a member of the Night's Watch, he can't really talk to him properly until he returns from his ranging and John is a member of the Night's Watch. Why is this important? Because once John is a member of the Night's Watch, he has disavowed all titles, inheritances. He is a member of the Night's Watch. He is no longer a member of any house. He's no longer going to play the Game of Thrones. He is safe, like Aemon Targaryen is safe at the wall, safe from the wrath of Robert Baratheon. But Benjen cannot tell him until he is a member of the Night's Watch, until he has made that vow. So that's where the regret is. Why not Howland Reed? Well, Ned does trust Howland, but Howland, it would appear, as part of this deal, Howland is staying in the Neck. He's not come out from there. No one's seen him. Even when he wishes to make contact, he sends his children. So Howland is staying in the Neck. And frankly, the actual promises, the detail of the promises, seems to have been done in secret between Ned and Lyanna. The actual iteration of things. Now, I've said about the fever dream, George R. R. Martin is very clear we shouldn't take the fever dream literally, but outside of the fever dream, that is a very discreet and very clear where the boundaries of the fever dream are. When Ned wakes up and then he thinks about things, it's very clear that he goes into the Tower of Joy. He goes to Lyanna. They have some sort of question. Promise me, Ned. He promises her. And then she dies. And then he collapses in some way. We don't know the details. Again, I can go into it if you're interested, but he collapses, and that is where they find him. Who they are is another mystery, but Howland Reed is one of them, almost certainly. But they find him afterwards, after Lyanna has died, after Ned has made his promises. They appear to be promises that he made to her personally. He may not have shared those with Howland Reed. He may have just shared the, I'm going to take this child, I'm going to pretend it's mine bit. Question from Remy Sparkle Muffin. Fun name. Hi, Robert. Thanks for your content. It's kept me going through the bad times, and I'm glad to be able to support now. Well, thank you very much. My question is Rebellion adjacent, and also I'm really pleased it helped you through the hard times. This is something, it keeps me going, hearing the stories of how what I do is helping people when they need help. So I'm really pleased. Why didn't Ned claim that John was Brandon's bastard? That would have A, given a reason to the world that Ned needed to raise Jon, B, keep Jon safe. If Robert thought Brandon was the father, then Jon couldn't be a Targaryen. C, kept Ned's honor and marriage intact. Cat wouldn't feel threatened, and Jon would be out of the line of succession. People would have believed it, as Brandon was known to be promiscuous. So why didn't Ned say, this is Brandon Stark's child? Well, two reasons, really. First, we're at this point good 18 months into the war. Brandon died at the beginning of it, and Jon is born at the end of it. The numbers don't quite add up. He did seem to sort of slightly fudge the exact dates, and who would know the exactly when babies were born, but fudging it a month or so here and there doesn't make huge amounts of difference. But also, I think it's sort of on a wider point, we can say that Ned, we can throw all sorts of better ideas here. I think if we put our minds to it and we sort of sat down and we had a whiteboard and we thought about it for a while, we could probably come up with a better story. We could probably come up with a better plan that could do at least one of those things: help save Ned's marriage, maybe his reputation, maybe keep Jon safe. It would have done some of those things. I'm sure we could come up with a better plan. But this is, I think, good story writing, George R. Martin's point. Ned made this decision in the heat of the moment at the end of an incredibly stressful period of time. He may well have promised that was what he was going to do. Maybe this was what Lyanna wanted him to do, and he had to promise that specific thing. And also, frankly, I'm trying to say this as delicately as possible, but Ned he's not a genius. I'm not meaning that he's stupid by any stretch of the imagination, but it's very clear from reading Cat's POV early on. It was one of the things when I was rereading or re-listening my way through Game of Thrones. One of the things that struck me is Cat comes across. George R. R. Martin writes Cat as being very clever, and so we have to buy into that idea that she's very clever. And there are a few times when from Cat's POV, she's there with Ned and she says something, and then Ned sort of like stares out of the window for a while, and then we just hear Cat's inner monologue going, he'll catch up in a moment. I'll just give him a few minutes and he'll figure it out. And it's clear that Ned's brain works slowly. He gets there in the end, but he works in a slightly slower way. And you see that all the way through when he gets to King's Landing. He's not picking things up. He's not picking up all of the nuances of what's happening. He's, as I say, he's not stupid by any stretch of the imagination, but he's not the brilliant mind that some of the characters that we have are. So it is right that he comes up with a plan. It is in character that he comes up with a plan that works, but it's not absolutely 100% foolproof. That feels like a Ned plan. It's all about caring about his family. It's about love and not caring about his own honor. That feels like a Ned plan. He probably could have come up with a better one, but he wasn't. He wasn't that person. Okay, so Dylan, question. Actually, we're moving now a bit away from the core topic. I've got about 3 more questions, which are slightly broader from my patrons. But if you've got more questions in the chat, do drop them in there, and I will try and pick up as many of them as people saying Ned sucks at intrigue. His brilliance does not lie with intrigue. So question from good. Now's a good time to drop questions in the chat, is what I'm saying. Question from Dylan saying, hey Robert, now that you're on the final act of Targaryen rule in Westeros, what is your ranking of the Targaryen kings? For me, it's Aegon the First, then Jaehaerys the First, then Viserys the Second, Aegon the Sixth, Maegor the Cruel, then Daeron the Second. Um, I think this really depends on what criteria. How are we ranking them? From good to bad, effective to ineffective. How strong a ruler were they? Um, so I don't think I've got a clear iteration of all of those things. I think what I would do is pick up on, and the other thing I would say, I will answer this properly in just 1 second, but I'll get all the caveats out of the way first. The other thing I would say is that a lot of the kings in the second half of the Targaryen dynasty, we know a lot less about than the kings in the first half of the Targaryen dynasty. And because of Fire and Blood, part one, it only goes halfway through the story. And it's probably fair to say that Fire and Blood has given us, allowed some kings to sort of go up in estimations and some kings to go down in estimations. And we have to filter our way through what the maesters think as well. So, caveats done. How do we kind of rate these kings? Well, I think you have to put Jaehaerys near the top. He was a good and strong king. He led what was a disparate group of kingdoms and did the boring things well. He started getting the different codification of laws across them, the seven kingdoms, and just brought them all together. He started building the king's roads, joining the kingdom together. He balanced the books. He managed to bring everything into profit. So this is what a good king does. He wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I personally hold him responsible for a lot of the Targaryen superiority complex that they have by setting up this doctrine of exceptionalism that says that the Targaryens are different to everybody else. Therefore, they don't have to follow the same rules as everybody else. Therefore, they can do different things, and the law does not apply to them. That feeds into the Targaryen egos down through the ages and makes them think that, frankly, they are above the law. I think that is a big black mark against him. But he worked well with Alicent, and they brought in some wonderful laws as well to do with things like widows and the first night as well. So that's good. Daeron the Good, Daeron the Second, we don't know huge amounts about yet, but I love the fact that he was named the Good, not by the maesters, not by anyone. He was named the Good by the small folk, which is a detail that I think is very telling. The small folk thought he was good, and that alone, I think, means that we have to put him quite high. I also think Viserys, we're going to be seeing in House of the Dragon is, and I don't know how they're going to present him, but he comes across in Fire and Blood as being quite weak. That's a thing that we can say to him. He could have done a whole lot more to prevent the descent into civil war that followed. But I have a soft spot for him. I have to say, he followed up Jaehaerys, this great reign, and kept the kingdom on an even keel, and the kingdom grew and prospered under his rule. And he did the brave thing, brave for a Targaryen, of naming his daughter heir, and he never wavered from that position. And one could say, yes, he could have done more to prevent the warring factions, but frankly, he was very clear who he thought should take over from him. And that was a brave decision, because that completely undermined his own right to be king, because his right to be king was based on male preference primogeniture. And by sticking with his daughter being his heir, he is saying that is no longer going to be the case going forward. So I've got a soft spot for him. I think he's an underrated king. Egg, yes, seemed to have been a good king to start with in intent, but he couldn't control his own family. I think this was Bloodraven meddling in things, but he couldn't control his own family to achieve the ends that he wanted to do. So there were a few good ones out of them. You putting Maegor the Cruel up there above there on the second, personally, no. I don't do that. I don't think that he was either good as in good or particularly effective. The band was in riot against him. Kofi Amankwa saying, how did Danny learn Low Valyrian? Well, this is from the younger years when they were growing up. They went all around the free cities. Her and Viserys went all around the free cities, and that is spoken in a lot of different places. That's sort of a lingua franca in a lot of Essos, because there's lots of different languages spoken, but because the Valyrian Empire had ruled over so much of the continent, having Valyrian, High Valyrian for the highborns and Low Valyrian for the lowborns, as a kind of a language that everybody understands, means that it makes absolute sense for her to know and understand it. Question from I'm sure I did have it. Oh, here we go. Chaos Ballerina saying Maester questions. Okay, here we go. If the Maesters read all the letters, how much of the truth of the rebellion did they know and keep to themselves? Does Ned know they know? Why would Wallace want Northern independence? Okay, so the question about the Maesters, did the Maesters know? Well, this is one of those things about who knew actually about Rhaegar and Lyanna. Actually, probably quite a lot of people. Because if there was communication, as there surely must have been, between the Tower of Joy and Doran Martell, that would have had to have been via a Maester. A Maester must have been there for the birth of Jon. The Maesters knew a huge amount. How much of the truth of the rebellion did they know and keep to themselves? Probably quite a lot. The Maesters would have been happy for the Targaryens to go, in as much as they weren't. Yes, we all know the Maesters' ultimate aim is to sort of get rid of magic and have this science and enlightenment based world. The Targaryens, even without dragons, are still a little bit magicy. They still have, some of them, the dragon dreams. They still have slight powers, like the being heat resistant, not heat immune, but heat resistant. And there's always, as long as the Targaryens were there, there was always the possibility that maybe, just maybe, one day the dragons would come back. So I think that the Maesters would have been very happy for the Targaryens to go. That means that they weren't necessarily wanting to stop anything. They weren't necessarily wanting the truth of anything to come out, because things were progressing in the way that they wanted. Kaziglu Bay, how would the rebellion have been different if Rhaegar had a dragon? Well, if it's just Rhaegar who had a dragon, very different. I mean, people would have known where he was to start with. And if he rode the dragon, let's assume that everything carried on exactly as it had until the moment that he actually entered the war. I think, unless there was a lucky shot on behalf of the rebellion army, then it seems reasonably clear that Rhaegar would have just burnt all of the Northerners, Vale men, and Riverlanders, and come back and claimed the throne. That a dragon is a complete game changer in this world. There's no real way around it. It does not make you invulnerable. Your dragon can die, but almost certainly, if he'd had that dragon and no one else had any dragons, then yeah, they would have won that battle. Chaos Ballerina. Are wedding assassinations common? Aerys was afraid to go to Rhaegar's wedding because he was afraid, and we have 2 wedding assassinations already in Game of Thrones. Yeah, I mean, he afraid, but also didn't like the Dornish. So there were a few different levels there. Are wedding assassinations common? Yes, we've had 2, but I'm struggling to think back in the histories whether there are any. I can't think of. Maybe someone in the chat will remember some more in the histories. They shouldn't be, because everybody, this guest right effectively has been given to everyone, so there shouldn't be. But it just is a time when people are gathered together. That's probably the best way of putting it. And if you are going to assassinate people, then you might as well do it when everyone's gathered together, and who knows who could have done it. Jimmy Klimt saying hi and thank you for reigniting my love of reading. Ah, this is amazing. Working through Feast and Fire and Blood. Next is Fever Dream and then Dune. Well, that makes me really happy if I've reignited your love of reading. That wow, love it. In terms of Feast, Fire and Blood, and then Fever Dream. Fever Dream, for those who do not know it, this is George R. R. Martin book he wrote before Song of Ice and Fire. It's my favorite non-Song of Ice and Fire book that he's written. It's vampires in the deep south, vampires on paddle boats. I think it sells it already. If you're a fan of that kind of thing and you're a fan of George R. R. Martin's writing, then do that. And then Dune, yeah, definitely absolute classic. I'm really pleased. Do enjoy them. Question from Chaos Ballerina. Could the Danes and or Martells have helped take down the Tower of Joy? Why take it down? The stones can't exactly talk. Why leave the bones and invite scrutiny? Well, this is one of the most curious things about it all. It did happen. This wasn't part of the fever dream. Ned recalls this happening. Outside of the fever dream is that after the Tower of Joy, he tore it down stone by stone. He used the stones as cairns to bury the bodies. Why? Well, it took. I was pondering this. I can remember when I was doing Robert's Rebellion series all the way through. I had this question in my mind. I didn't have it answered until I got there. Until I got to that video. It took me many months to get to that video, and when I started doing the video, I still wasn't 100% sure, and I was quite happy to say I simply do not know why. But I think we can go with the human solution on this, which is Ned seems to have gone to extreme lengths. This we know. He seems to have gone to extreme lengths for no one to ever find out where the Tower of Joy was or what happened there or anything. We know that this is the key moment in his life. We know that this is a traumatic moment. We know that he collapsed, such as the pain and agony of what happened there. This is something which is the hinge of his entire life, what happened there at the Tower of Joy. And we know that when he got up to back up to the north, he brought with him, and we get this, George R. R. Martin deliberately brings our attention to this, so it's a thing that we should be aware of. Barbary Dustin, who is a great character who appears in the later few books, she was the wife of Lord Dustin, one of the people who went down to the Tower of Joy with Ned and died. And the House Dustin at Baratheon, this is the center of burying the dead in the north. Baratheon is because it's in the Barrowlands. This is where the dead are buried. The family house is on the top of the Long Barrow, the biggest barrow. This is all about honoring the dead. Ned comes back via there and says, "Here's your husband's horse." And she says, "I see you've brought your sister's bones back up north. Where's my husband's bones?" And he says nothing. He doesn't. We don't know the details of it, but he does not say. He does not. He does not bring the bones up. He does not tell the Silent Sisters to bring the bones up. He does not tell Barbary Dustin where the bones are buried so that she can send people down to get the bones. He has made an enemy for life here because he does not want anybody going to the Tower of Joy, anybody knowing where it was. This, I think, is the human answer to why he tore down the Tower of Joy. Just sheer over the top emotional overreaction. I'm just getting rid. This is a horrible memory for me. It's death. It's the end of this nightmarish 18 months. I'm just ripping this thing to the ground. And never, ever, no one's ever coming here. No one's ever investigating what's happening here. I have to protect this baby. Maybe if they come here, they'll figure it out. That is what seems to be the most human answer to what is going on. Maybe there was some magical thing which helps him tear down the Tower of Joy, but he definitely did it. And that is why. Why leave the bones and invite scrutiny? He deliberately tried to avoid scrutiny. Is what is the questions. And could the Danes or Martells have helped take down the Tower of Joy? I don't think that they were there. The Danes, some Danes may have been there, but no, not to the Martells. Sarah Awesome Sauce, thank you so much for the super sticker. Appreciate that. Do you like your name, by the way? Awesome Sauce. And Totsprachen Leben Langer saying, is White Walls a foil for Harrenhal? Okay, this is an interesting question. So when you say a foil for it, we get White Walls being a place where it was destroyed following the Second Blackfire Rebellion. And having White Walls is an opposite of Black Walls, which is what we're told Harrenhal has. So yes, you could have a sort of a mirror. Let me think. I will think before next. If something comes up next week with a stronger link than that, which I'm assuming you've got some idea about why you've put this question. But if I think of something between now and then, I will mention it next week. But there definitely is a sort of a symbolic opposites going on there. Totsprachen Leben Langer, the war took about a year. How much of that was spent by people just moving about, e.g. Brandon Rickard to King's Landing, Ned to Storm's End to the Tower of Joy, etc.? Yeah, so it took over a year. But in terms of how much of that was spent just moving about, well, a lot, really. They didn't really stop much, is the short answer. But you know how long it takes to travel around these places. George R. R. Martin is deliberately vague about the exact timings. Then he's been honest about it. Is that he partly this is that he just doesn't want to sort of put specific dates in there because it just makes everything very complicated, and partly because that's not how that world worked. They didn't have this very specific, it took 2 weeks to go from A to B. You don't have to say the exact dates of what's going on and where. How much of it was people just moving around? Well, most of it, as I said. So from the moment that Lyanna and Rhaegar left Harrenhal, you get a 2-week hard ride from the inn at the crossroads down to King's Landing for Brandon. Then we get Rickard coming down afterwards, and a few other lords, because a lot of the noble lords were all summoned at the time. the fathers of the people who went with Brandon, they were all summoned. And so that was another 2 weeks or so. Rickard was on the road at the time. Then we get news that we get Robert Baratheon and Ned both doing things, heading off north and south. So Robert Baratheon, I've already mapped out where he went, and Ned, his journey through the mountains will have taken a long time. Then there was the sea voyage. That took a while because he got shipwrecked. Getting up from White Harbour up to Winterfell took a while. Presumably, he may have sort of radioed ahead, or the medieval equivalent, and tried to rally the banners that way to speed things up. But then, as we know, simply getting the army from Winterfell all the way down south, particularly when there's been a long, hard winter, that takes a matter of months. So yes, a lot of this does take time. At the very end of it, again, we can add in a few sort of rough timings. It took Ned a couple of weeks to get down from the Ruby Ford to King's Landing. There was a couple of Robert Baratheon arrived a few days later. Then he headed on down to Storm's End. We know Storm's End again is 2 weeks away. Then he headed over to the Tower of Joy. That we don't have any exact times for what that is, but somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks sounds about right for a small group traveling quite hard, but not on the main road. So yeah, lots of traveling, and then a few battles mixed in with all of it. Question from Fozimo Mont saying, "Hi Robert, I'm curious about Littlefinger's ladder of chaos, and I wonder if it was less chaotic than it appeared to him. Might other powers be supplying a helpful rung here and there, as long as his maneuvers are consistent with their aims? For instance, until he makes his intentions clear during Sansa and Winterfell, regarding Sansa and Winterfell, his actions often seem indirectly helpful to Bloodraven." Well, yes and no. I am generally of the view that Bloodraven does not want all of humanity killing itself. Yes, he's a very shady character, but he seems to be operating on what he considers to be the greater good, which is saving humanity from the White Walkers from the others, and that he will not be able to do if everybody is constantly at war with one another. So I don't think that everything Littlefinger was doing was necessarily in line with what Bloodraven wanted. What it is worth saying is that the more I analyze Littlefinger's plans, the more I come to the view that actually, whereas he says chaos is a ladder, and I'm just trying to make use of it, that this actually is code for him telling us quite how arrogant he is, because he thinks, I'm going to create chaos. Chaos is going to create opportunities, and I am going to be better than anyone else at making use of those opportunities. So that's what he's saying, and that implies a huge amount of arrogance. So it works for him because he's seen it work, because he knows that that's what's going to happen. But because he's arrogant, he cannot see the wider things that are going on, because every time he creates ripples out there in the universe, there are extra problems for him, chances for people to find out what he has been up to. Tyrion, for example, has got an understanding of Littlefinger's lies, simply because he knows that Littlefinger lied about the Valyrian steel dagger, the cat's paw dagger. So he will do. Sansa is starting to understand about what's going on. People are starting to see because he creates so many ripples from what he does that people will see the lies. And this is one of the reasons why I personally think that Jaqen H'ghar was hired by him to kill Ned, because Littlefinger will know. Ned understands that Littlefinger was lying and cheating, and he was um, manipulating and betraying Ned. And there is no way on this planet he will want Ned to get out to speak to Cat about this, because he cared hugely about what Cat thought about him. So he had to be sure, if Ned was going to escape being executed and sent up, as the plan appears to have been, and sent up to join the Night's Watch, that somebody else in that troop of people going up to the Night's Watch was going to assassinate Ned. Reflective Rambling saying, totally off topic, but I will never stop advocating for a general list of book recommendations, video or thread. Okay, I'll do that at some point. I will add that to the list. Plum Kettle, no woman was ever going to win against Lyanna's memory. Poor Robert and Cersei. Please do June videos. Yes, for the first bit, no woman was ever going to win against Lyanna's memory. Poor Robert and Cersei. Yeah, their marriage was doomed from the start. The problem was, though, that marrying somebody for political reasons was not an alien concept at the time. In fact, that was the norm for noble people, that you were not expected to necessarily love your other person, the person that you were married to. So that wasn't actually the problem. It meant that they had an unhappy marriage. The problem for Cersei had a lover who she had children with, and it was her brother. So that was the bigger problem. I think the fact that they did not love each other, and he loved someone else and she loved someone else, that was far from rare in those times. As for please doing June videos, I've decided at the moment maybe I'll change my mind for when the second June movie comes out, which is apparently planned for 2023. So we've got a good 2 years to wait for that. But for this June video, just movie and the book, obviously, I just decided I just wanted to watch that as a fan. There are some things I think, you know what, rather than watching this notebook in hand, scribbling things down, constructing videos about stuff, I just want to sit down and enjoy it. And that was what I did with June. I just sat down and enjoyed it. So Quinn's Ideas, best place I know of for June videos. Please do go and check him out. Question from this is my last question from my patrons, so now any final questions in the chat would be good. But Lady Savum saying, hi Robert, just finished watching last week's video, and the question about the Reach led me back to my favorite house Tyrell. You mentioned that Marjorie is modeled after Anne Boleyn, but do you think she could be a reverse Henry VIII, in that she's the one with all the husbands? Do you think that should something befall Tommen, she'll be pushed towards husband number 4, Fagon? Thanks for all you do. Your channel is what I look forward to on Thursday evenings. Well, thank you for that. I love this idea, because I very clearly in my mind, the Anne Boleyn thing is quite a clear and strong link. I'm very sure George R. R. Martin has made that link, that she has falsely accused the king's wife, falsely accused of all manner of sexual debauchery, including specifically an affair with the minstrel. This is right out of what Anne Boleyn was accused of. And it almost certainly untrue. So that is a very clear echo. The Henry VIII link is quite a fascinating one, because yes, that's the other side here, and this is now her third husband. Could George R. R. Martin be doing this as a she's both sides of this as a kind of a reflection? Well, yes, he could. There's no reason why he shouldn't. I personally think that she will not survive the next book. I think that Fagon, his potential matches are Daenerys. That's what their ideal plan is, or Ariane Martell, or possibly another one of the Martells, the Sand Snakes or whatever, because there's the link across to June. I don't think that she'll be around to be marrying Fagon. One final thing on the the Henry VIII. It's quite for those who know their Tudor history. There's the rhyme to how to remember Henry VIII's wives: is divorced, beheaded, died; divorced, beheaded, survived. But so far for Marjorie's, and what it looks like Marjorie's is going to be died. So she's had perhaps slightly less luck. Okay, let's have a quick look in the chat for any final comments. Mathematical 55 saying there are many similarities with the Tudors. Robert Baratheon winning his rebellion is analogous to Henry Tudor defeating Richard III. Yes, it is. Robert Baratheon is also very much an echo of Henry VIII, as many people have pointed out. He, in his youth, this fine figure of a man, but the older he gets, the fatter he gets, the less likable he gets. So yes, he's very much a Henry VIII kind of figure. Karis Ballerina saying, is that why they chose Natalie Dormer? She played Anne Boleyn previously. I hadn't made that link, but yeah, that's good. M. Lari saying, did the Maesters have any role in Robert's Rebellion, and why is it called Robert's Rebellion if the reason of the rebellion was the Starks rather than the Baratheons? It was called Robert's Rebellion because by the end of it, he was the one who became king, and history is written by the winners. And so the way it is recorded by the Maesters, and if you read the start of The World of Ice and Fire, you see this is hagorific about the great enlightened Robert Baratheon and Robert's Rebellion. Doesn't really the actual history is secondary in that to what the Maesters want people to know. But did they have any role in the rebellion? There are sort of, as I said, there are possibilities that they were certainly very happy for the Targaryens to leave power, but there's not a golden thread that makes it very clear that that was exactly what was happening. Okay, I think with that, I'm going to bring this to a close. Next week, we're back in the world of Middle-earth. We're going to be looking at the Second Age. I will have another guest on for that. I introduce you to another fabulous content creator in the world of Tolkien Tube. And the Second Age is important because if you are looking forward to the Lord of the Rings TV show, as I think you should be, then that is going to be set in the Second Age. There's been lots of talk that where else this could be set, because certainly the picture that they showed us, the only thing they've officially published so far, is a picture from well before the Second Age, but the whole series, or the series as a whole, will be set in the Second Age of Middle-earth. So we're going to be looking at that. What does that actually mean? What stories might we therefore be looking at? What's the overarching narrative of the Second Age? And then perhaps getting into a few of the details of a few of the main characters to look out for as well. Okay, so that's what's going to be happening next week. If you want to be watching more live streams, then there's going to be a link appearing somewhere here. If you're watching back later, there will be a link appearing somewhere here or down there in the description to my Patreon page, which is the best way to support this channel if you would like to do so. Okay, take care, everyone, and I shall see you again next time.